The Sword and the Dragon. Act 1. A Confession at the Edge of Everything. Chapter 1. The training grounds behind the Occult Research Club were quiet at this hour, which was exactly why Xenovia Quarta had chosen them. The rest of the club had retired after dinner. Rias Gremory had gone to review correspondence from her brother Surzex. Akino Himejima had disappeared upstairs with a pot of chamomile tea and a book she kept insisting was a strategic manual, but smelled suspiciously like a romance novel. Asia Argento had walked Issei Hyoudou to his door and said goodnight with that gentle, luminous smile she gave everyone who mattered to her, then drifted off to her own room humming a quiet hymn. The house had settled, and Xenovia was standing in the dark with a wooden training sword in her hand, swinging it at nothing, because swinging at nothing was the only way she knew how to think. The problem was Issei. She was not embarrassed to admit this to herself. Xenovia Quarta did not believe in pretending that things were not what they were. She had been raised by the church, shaped by doctrine and blade work, and she had learned early that self-deception was one of the few sins that compounded on itself. If you lied to yourself, you built everything on top of that lie, and eventually the whole structure collapsed in a way that was much worse than the original truth would have been. The original truth was simple. She liked Issei Hyoudou. She liked him more than she had liked any person in her life. She liked him in a way that was entirely inconvenient and entirely unavoidable, and that had been quietly growing in the back of her chest for months now, getting heavier and more specific with every passing week. Until she had finally reached the point where she could not swing a training sword without thinking about the way he had stood in front of her during the raiding game last month when a stray attack had come in from the left, and he had simply stepped in front of it without looking like he was doing anything heroic at all. He probably did not even remember doing it. That was the thing about Issei. He did things like that constantly, these small, instinctive acts of protection that he seemed completely unaware of, as though standing between the people he cared about and anything that might hurt them was just a natural position for a human body to occupy. She had watched him do it for Asia, for Rias, for Kaneko Tuju, for all of them, and she had told herself for months that it was simply his character, that she was observing a general quality of the person rather than feeling anything specific herself. She had been lying to herself. She drove the wooden sword forward in a precise thrust and held the extension, feeling the resistance in her shoulder, the alignment from hip to fingertip. She would tell him tomorrow. She had been telling herself she would tell him for 3 weeks. But this time she actually meant it, because she had worked out the logic and the logic was sound. Xenovia operated on logic when she could not operate on faith, and faith had become a complicated thing for her ever since she had learned that God was dead. Logic said, the feeling was not going away. Logic said, it was affecting her performance because she was spending training sessions thinking about his voice instead of her footwork. Logic said, the only efficient resolution was to state the situation directly and allow the other party to respond. She was going to walk up to Issei Hyoudou tomorrow morning and tell him that she had feelings for him. She took a breath, lowered the sword, and looked up at the sky over Ko. It was a clear night. Stars she could not name were out in force, and the town below the Occult Research Club's hill was a scatter of soft lights, the kind of view that people wrote poems about if they were the sort of person who wrote poems. Xenovia was not the sort of person who wrote poems. But she understood, standing there, why someone might want to. She went inside and washed her hands and went to sleep, and she did not dream of anything at all. Chapter 2. Morning at the Hyoudou residence had a particular texture to it, and Issei had long since stopped noticing the texture because he had become part of it. He was downstairs before anyone else, the way he usually was on Saturdays, because Saturday was his day to make breakfast. This had not been formally decided. It had simply emerged from the accumulated weight of Saturday mornings over the past several months, each one building on the last, until it was simply a fact of the household. On Saturday mornings, Issei made breakfast. He was not a brilliant cook. He was competent, which in his estimation was more useful than brilliant. He could make rice without burning it. He could make miso soup with 4 different ingredient combinations depending on what was in the refrigerator. He could make tamagoyaki, the rolled omelette that Asia had requested once and then looked at with such unguarded delight that he had quietly decided he would make it every week until she stopped making that face. She had not stopped making that face. Issei cracked the fourth egg and tilted the pan. The kitchen was warm and the windows were steamed at the edges from the soup on the back burner, and there was a particular morning light coming through the curtains that made everything look like a photograph from a life that was going very well. Issei did not take this for granted. He was aware, in a way that had become part of his daily consciousness, that his life was extraordinary. Not because of the dragon inside him, not because of the sacred gears sealed in his left arm, not because he was a devil in the service of Rias Gremory, though all of those things were true. His life was extraordinary because of the people in it. He heard footsteps on the stairs and knew by the cadence and the weight of them that it was Xenovia. Xenovia walked differently from everyone else in the house. Asia walked lightly, as though she was trying not to disturb anything. Rias walked like she had considered the floor and found it acceptable. Akina walked like she was performing walking for an audience that found her very interesting. Xenovia walked like she was going somewhere, and the floor happened to be in the way. She came through the kitchen doorway and stopped. "Breakfast is in about 10 minutes, Issei said without turning around, because the soup needed attention. "I know." She paused. "I was going to talk to you. You can talk while I cook." Another pause. Issei turned down the heat on the soup and turned to look at her, and he noticed immediately that she was standing the way she stood when she was deciding something. Hands at her sides, weight balanced, shoulders exactly level. She looked like herself but more deliberate, like she had put on her own face more carefully than usual. "I have feelings for you," Xenovia said. Issei turned the burner off entirely. "I have been thinking about how to say this for a while and I decided that the most efficient approach was the direct one," she continued, in the same tone she might use to explain a formation drill. "I am not comfortable with ambiguity, and the feeling has been present for long enough that I am confident it is not temporary. I am also aware that there are other people in this household who have feelings for you, and I am not asking you to resolve anything immediately. I am telling you because not telling you was affecting my focus." Issei stared at her. Xenovia met his gaze and waited, with the calm patience of someone who had stated a fact and was simply allowing the other party time to process it. "Xenovia," Issei said. "Yes. When you say feelings, I mean that I respect you, and that I like being near you, and that last month when you stepped in front of that attack during the raiding game without looking like you were doing it on purpose, I thought about it for 4 days afterward." She paused. "I also think you are, on balance, a good person. More than that, I think you are genuinely trying to be a good person, which is different and harder. I find that I want to be near someone who is genuinely trying." The soup was cooling on the back burner. Morning light came through the curtains. Issei Hyoudou, who had spent a significant portion of his adolescence convinced that no girl would ever want to hold his hand, stood in his kitchen and listened to Xenovia Quarta explain, in precise and slightly formal language, that she had fallen for him. "I have feelings for you too," he said. Xenovia nodded once, as though he had confirmed a hypothesis she had been fairly confident about. "Okay," she said. "Then we should talk more." "After breakfast." "Yeah," Issei said. "After breakfast." He turned the burner back on and finished the soup, and his hands were not entirely steady, and he did not mind this at all. Chapter 3. The conversation after breakfast lasted 3 hours. They sat on the back steps of the Hyoudou residence because the morning was cool and clear and neither of them had suggested going inside, and somewhere in the first 20 minutes it had become understood that they were staying here, on these steps, until they had worked out what they were doing. Issei had expected this to be complicated. He had relationships with other people in his life that were complicated in ways he had not fully resolved, and he was aware that adding another layer of complication to an already complicated situation was a significant decision. He said as much, plainly, because Xenovia had been plain with him, and it felt right to be plain back. "I know about the others," Xenovia said. "I live here. I am not under any illusions about the situation. I want to be clear about what I can offer," Issei said. "I don't want to be someone who promises things he can't deliver." Xenovia looked at him sideways. "What can you offer?" He thought about it. He was quiet for a long moment, watching a crow move across the far end of the yard in the careful, investigative way that crows had, like it was considering filing a report. "I can be honest with you," he said finally. "I can pay attention. I can try to be the kind of person you described. I can't promise that I have everything figured out because I don't have everything figured out. But if you're asking whether what I said was true, about having feelings for you, then yes. That was true. That's been true for a while. Xenovia absorbed this. The church would not approve, she said, but there was something in her voice that made it clear she was not looking to the church for approval on this particular matter. The church also didn't approve of most of the things that have turned out to matter to you, Issei pointed out. A corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the architecture of one. That's true, she said. They sat quietly for a moment. The crow had disappeared. The morning was warming up, the cool starting to give way to what would eventually become a pleasant October afternoon. I want to take this seriously, Issei said. If we're going to do this. I don't want it to be something that just drifts. I want to actually mean it. I was hoping you would say something like that, Xenovia said. Why? Because I have never done anything halfway. And I was not planning to start. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, and the morning went on around them with its ordinary sounds, birds and traffic and somewhere distant a radio playing a song that was too far away to identify, and something settled between them that felt less like a beginning than like the formalization of something that had already been quietly true for a long time. Chapter 4. Telling Rias was not as difficult as Issei had feared. He had been dreading it, in the specific way that he dreaded anything that had the potential to hurt someone he cared about, and he had spent the better part of Sunday working up to the conversation, which meant he had spent Sunday cleaning the kitchen twice and reorganizing the training equipment in the basement in a way that made no structural improvement, but gave his hands something to do. Rias found him at the training equipment, and stood in the doorway with her arms folded and her expression patient. You are rearranging those weights in the exact same order they were in before, she observed. I know. Is there something you wanted to say to me? He set down the weight in his hand, turned around and said it. Rias listened without interrupting. She had this quality, this particular quality that Issei had noticed over many months, of being able to listen to something difficult without flinching away from it, of keeping her face open and present even when what she was hearing was something that required her to adjust her understanding of her own situation. It was not a passive quality. It cost her something. He could see that it cost her something. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Xenovia told you directly, Rias said. Saturday morning? That is very like her. A pause. And you feel the same way? Yes. Rias nodded slowly. She walked further into the training room and sat on the bench along the wall, which was what she did when she was going to have a serious conversation rather than a quick one. I'm not angry with you, she said. I want you to understand that first. I'm not angry, and I am not going to pretend to be fine immediately, because that would be dishonest. But I am also not going to pretend that I am unaware of my own feelings or of yours, and I have known for some time that the situation in this household was not simple. Rias, let me finish. She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that was sad and clear at the same time, the way deep water looked from above. I care about you a great deal, Issei. That has not changed. It will not change. And I care about Xenovia. She is mine, she is part of my peerage, and I want her to be happy. I want both of you to be happy. She paused. I would simply like some time to feel what I feel before I am expected to perform any particular response. Of course, Issei said. Thank you for telling me directly. You deserve that much. She looked at him for a moment longer, and then she smiled, and it was a real smile, a little worn at the edges but genuine, the smile of someone who was choosing to mean what she was saying. She chose well, Rias said quietly, and Issei did not have a response for that, so he didn't give one, and somehow that was all right. Chapter 5. Akino thought it was wonderful. She said so immediately and without qualification when Issei mentioned it to her in the hallway outside the club room, and her smile was the particular smile she had when something delighted her, which was the smile that showed her dimple and made her eyes go soft. Xenovia, she said, as though tasting the word. I should have predicted this. She has been watching you with that expression for months. What expression? The expression she makes when she has identified something important, and is deciding what to do about it. Like when she is determining the most effective way to approach a fortified position. Akino's smile widened slightly. Apparently you were the fortified position. Issei rubbed the back of his neck. That's one way to look at it. I think it is very good, Akino said, and the lightness in her voice shifted briefly into something more genuine and less performed. She is earnest, and she is loyal, and she does not know how to be dishonest about things that matter. You need that. You need someone who will just say the thing directly rather than waiting for you to guess it. There was something personal in the way she said it, a small acknowledgement that she included herself in the category of people who did not always say the thing directly, and Issei understood this and appreciated the honesty of it. Does this change things between you and me? He asked. Akino considered the question with genuine seriousness. No, she said after a moment. I don't think it does. I think it adds something rather than subtracts. The people in this house have always been layered with each other. Adding one more layer just means the fabric is a little stronger. She tilted her head. Besides, I have never been in competition with Xenovia. That is not how any of this works. Issei nodded. Go talk to Asia, Akino said gently. She will want to hear it from you. He found Asia in the garden, kneeling in front of the small flower bed she had planted in August, and she looked up when she heard his footsteps and her face was already beginning to arrange itself toward concern because she could read him the way she could read weather, had always been able to tell when something was weighing on him. He told her. Asia listened very carefully, the way she always did, her whole attention given over to the person speaking. When he was done she sat quietly for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, and then she looked at him with eyes that were bright and a little glassy and she said, I am happy for you, Issei-san. Asia. I mean it. She looked down at her flowers for a moment. I have had a long time to understand my own feelings. I know what they are. I also know that love does not work the way I used to think it did when I was with the church. It is not a thing you divide. It is a thing that grows. She looked up again. I believe that. I believe that about you. Issei knelt down in the garden next to her, which was not a comfortable position but felt like the right one. You are one of the most important people in my life, he said. That is not going to change. Asia nodded, and she was smiling now, and the glistening in her eyes was the kind that went with smiling rather than the other kind. I know, she said. Now please help me with this route before dinner. It is being very difficult. He helped her with the route. It was, in fact, being very difficult. Chapter 6. October moved forward and the relationship between Issei and Xenovia settled into something that was both new and comfortable, which Issei found to be a combination he had not expected but appreciated considerably. They trained together in the mornings. They had always trained together, as part of the Gremory peerage's general schedule, but now the training had a different quality to it, less tactical and more conversational, the kind where two people were learning each other through action rather than words. Xenovia was a more technical fighter than he was, precise and efficient, and she had opinions about his footwork that she expressed directly, and without softening. You are leading with your left shoulder again, she told him, on a Wednesday morning in the second week of October, and she stepped in and corrected his posture with her hands, and the correction was practical and impersonal, and also he was intensely aware of her hands and he was fairly certain she knew it. You could just say left shoulder, he said. I could. This is faster. Is it? Your posture improved immediately. So yes. He could not argue with this, so he did not. They walked to school together. This was also not new, since the entire household walked to Co-Academy together most mornings, but Xenovia had started matching her pace to his, which was slower than her natural pace, and he had noticed and started walking slightly faster to meet her somewhere in the middle, so that by the second week the pace had adjusted itself to something that was genuinely shared. She talked to him about things she had not talked about before. Not confessionally, not with the kind of performed vulnerability that sometimes accompanied the early stages of closeness between people, but practically, in the same direct tone she used for everything else. She told him about her childhood in the church, about the training, about what it had been like to believe with complete conviction and then have the foundation of that conviction removed. It was not like losing faith, she explained, as they walked back from school one afternoon, the October sun laying long shadows across the road. Faith leaving feels like something going out, like a fire. This was different. This was learning that the room the fire was in had been built wrong. The room does not stop existing. You simply have to rebuild it. Are you still rebuilding it? She considered this carefully, the way she considered things that deserved careful answers. I think I am building something new, she said. The old room was not entirely mine. I am finding out what mine looks like. Issei walked beside her and thought about this and decided that it was one of the most honest things anyone had ever said to him about who they were. I think it's going to be a very good room, he said. Xenovia glanced at him. The sun was on her face and her blue hair moved in the October wind, and her expression was the careful, contained version of pleased that she had, the one she probably thought was not visible. I think so too, she said. Chapter 7. The first time Issei realized that what he felt was not just something he was experiencing but something he was building toward, he was in the middle of a raiding game. The Gremory peerage was matched against a visiting nobles team, a ceremonial game arranged at Sirzex Lucifer's suggestion as part of ongoing negotiations between two underworld families, and the field was a constructed landscape, stone cliffs and narrow passes, the kind of terrain that rewarded coordination over individual power. Xenovia was positioned on the right flank. Issei was center. The opposing team had a bishop who could generate gravity wells, a knight who could phase through solid matter for short intervals, and a rook who was simply enormous and approached problems by going through them. The knight phased through the cliff to Xenovia's left and came at her from an angle she had not expected. Issei was already moving before he consciously decided to move. He came around the base of the cliff on a different line, which meant he arrived a half-second before the knight completed the attack, and he caught the strike on his scale mail gauntlet and drove it to the side, and then Xenovia was there, Durandal's light filling the narrow pass, and the knight was out of the game. You tracked him, Xenovia said, not a question. He had a tell in his footwork before he phased. Always stepped right before he went through. I missed it. I was watching from the outside. Different angle. She looked at him for a moment, and there was something in her face that was the same thing he had felt when he saw the knight start his phase and felt the urgency that was specifically about her being on the other side of that move. Not just a teammate. Not just a friend. Thank you, she said. Always, he said, and meant it completely. They won the game in the next 40 minutes. The rook was the last piece standing, and Xenovia took it down with a strike that filled the entire pass with holy light, and Issei watched from 20 meters away and thought, this person is extraordinary. Not because of the sword, not because of the power, not even because of the precision and the discipline and the way she moved through a fight like she had already seen the end of it, and was simply executing the steps to get there, because of the way she had said thank you. Plain and direct and meaning it, no performance, no hedging, just the clean honest fact of it. He had never met anyone quite like her. He thought he probably never would again. Chapter 8. November arrived and brought with it a conference. Rias and her peerage were summoned to the Underworld for 3 days of formal meetings, the kind that happened every few months and involved enough formal clothing and political maneuvering that Issei always spent the first evening wishing he had studied more Underworld protocol, and the second evening having given up on that, and simply trying to follow whoever seemed to know where they were going. The conference was at the Gremory estate. Issei had been here before, but it did not stop the scale of it from being remarkable every time. The main hall with its vaulted ceilings and the red and black banners and the way every room seemed to be saying, quietly but firmly, that the Gremory family had been here for a very long time and planned to continue being here. The first evening there was a formal dinner, and Issei found himself seated between two older devils whose names he had been given during the introductions and immediately lost in the subsequent 4 handshakes, and he spent the first course being politely interrogated about his sacred gear by a woman who he gradually worked out was a historian of supernatural artifacts. It was not unpleasant. The historian was genuinely curious rather than politically motivated, and Issei had learned to tell the difference, and so he answered her questions as accurately as he could, and she told him 3 things about the history of sacred gears that he had not known before, and by the end of the first course he was enjoying the conversation. Across the table, Xenovia was seated next to one of the Gremory family's oldest allied nobles, a stern-faced man named Elijah who had served in 3 underworld conflicts and had opinions about military tactics that he expressed at length, and without particular invitation. Xenovia was listening to him with her full attention, which was visibly flattering to Elijah, and she was asking precise questions that Issei could tell were genuine rather than diplomatic because they were the kind of questions Xenovia asked when she was actually interested in something. When she caught his eye across the table, she raised an eyebrow by approximately 2 millimeters. He tilted his head slightly toward the historian. Her chin dipped the same 2 millimeters in return. It was a conversation conducted in the absence of any actual words, and Issei recognized it as he sat there and felt a warmth spreading outward from somewhere around his sternum, because a conversation without words meant two people who had been paying close enough attention to each other to have developed a shared vocabulary of gesture, and he was fairly certain that had happened without either of them deciding it was going to. After dinner there was a long reception and then a departure, and he and Xenovia walked back to the guest wing through a corridor that was empty and quiet except for their footsteps on the stone floor. Elijah told me about a siege he was involved in during the Second Great Conflict, Xenovia said. The tactical details were interesting. The emotional content was not interesting. He seemed very enthusiastic. He was. I have found that people who are very enthusiastic about military history are often very enthusiastic about the parts that are least important. Issei thought about this. The historian next to me was the opposite. She kept asking about the part one actually understand. Good. Xenovia paused at the door of her guest room. This is mine. Yeah. She looked at him with that look she had, the one that was assessing something and finding it satisfactory. Good night, Issei. Good night, Xenovia. She went in and closed the door, and Issei stood in the corridor for a moment, and then continued to his own room, and the warmth from dinner was still there, steady and particular, and he thought, this is what I am building toward. Whatever this is becoming. This is it. Chapter 9. December came. The Hyoudou residence had developed, over the course of the months since Issei had moved into it with a collection of devils and former church warriors and a formerly excommunicated nun, a set of traditions around the year's end that nobody had formally established but that everyone observed. Asia decorated the entryway with a small wreath because she had always loved the winter decorations she had seen from outside churches during her childhood and had never been allowed to participate in them. Rias served a specific tea that smelled of oranges and spice that her family had provided for generations. Aquino made a particular honey cake that she claimed was not from any specific tradition but that tasted like every good memory one might have of warmth and sweetness. Issei bought a small tree. This had happened last year as well. He had not announced it or asked anyone's opinion, he had simply arrived one afternoon with a small tree in a pot that he had spent 20 minutes selecting at the market, and he had put it in the corner of the common room, and by the next morning Asia had put her wreath above it, and Aquino had hung a few things from its branches that she produced from some storage location nobody had asked about. And the tree had become a fixture. This year, Xenovia helped him carry it. Not because it was heavy. It was approximately the same small tree as last year, but because she had seen him leaving and had pulled on her coat and come with him without a word of explanation, and they had walked to the market together, and he had spent his 20 minutes selecting the right tree while she stood beside him with her arms folded, observing the selection process with the same careful attention she gave to everything. That one, she said on minute 14. That one? The branches are even. It will hold decorations without leaning. He looked at the tree she had indicated. It was, in fact, the most structurally sound tree in the row. You're right, he said, and bought it. They carried it home together, one hand each on the pot, walking at the same pace they had learned over October and November, the shared pace that lived somewhere between his natural rhythm and hers. The evening was cold and the town had put its winter lights up, and the streets had that particular quality they got in December, of being both more alive and more peaceful simultaneously, as though the cold had asked everyone to slow down a little and they had agreed. Do you like winter? Issei asked. I don't dislike it, Xenovia said, which was a very Xenovia answer. Then, after a moment, I like this part. The early part. Before it becomes only cold and nothing else. The part with the lights. And the quiet. It gets quieter. I have always appreciated quiet. They carried the tree the rest of the way home in that quiet, which was its own kind of conversation, and put it in the corner of the common room where it had been last year, and Asia appeared in under 10 minutes with the wreath. Chapter 10. Issei proposed on the last day of December. He had been thinking about it since November, which was earlier than he had expected to be thinking about it, but the thinking had started naturally, and without his permission, and once it had started it did not stop. He was aware that this was fast by most measures. He was also aware that the measure being applied was conventional human courtship timelines, and that the life he lived was not governed by conventional timelines in any direction. He was also, more honestly, aware that the question had already answered itself. What he felt for Xenovia was not ambiguous or transitional or the product of proximity. It was specific and directional and growing, and he had spent enough time in the past year learning what real things felt like versus what performances and wishes felt like to be able to tell the difference. He bought a ring. This was more difficult than he had anticipated, not because of the costs but because of the choice, because he was standing in a small shop in Co trying to imagine which of the objects in front of him was something Xenovia would look at and feel was right, and the parameters of that question were specific. She did not like ornate things. She did not like things that announced themselves. She liked things that were exactly what they were. He found it eventually. A narrow band of white gold, no stones, simple and direct and unlikely to catch on anything during training. The last day of December was cold and clear. The household had spent the evening together, and as the night moved toward its end people had drifted toward their own rooms, the way they usually did, and the common room had gone quiet. Issei asked Xenovia if she wanted to go outside. They sat on the back steps again, the same steps where they had talked for 3 hours in October, and the year was ending around them, and somewhere in the city fireworks were beginning, bright and distant. I have been thinking, Issei said. About what? He turned to her. She was watching the fireworks, her face tipped slightly upward, and the distant light caught her eyes and her hair, and she looked like herself, exactly like herself, which was what he loved most about her. About the future, he said. About what I wanted to look like. Xenovia brought her gaze down from the fireworks and looked at him, and something in his expression told her this was a specific kind of conversation, because her attention sharpened in that particular way. And? She said. And I want you in it. Not as someone who is around. As someone who is specifically chosen. Who I am specifically building something with. He had the ring in his coat pocket, and he brought it out, not dramatically, not with any flourish, just opened his hand and held it out to her, the narrow white gold band sitting in his palm. I am not going to give you a long speech, he said. You do not like long speeches, and I'm not sure I'm good at them. What I can tell you is that I mean this. That I have thought about it. That I am not asking because I think I should or because I feel like I'm supposed to. I'm asking because it is what I want. Specifically. You. This. Xenovia looked at the ring. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked at him, and her face was very still and very open, which was the face she had when something had reached the part of her that was underneath the directness, and the discipline and the precise tactical thinking, the part that she kept careful. Yes, she said. Just that. Yes. Plain and direct and meaning everything. He put the ring on her finger. It fit, because he had paid attention to her hands the way he paid attention to everything about her, and she looked at it, and then looked at him, and for a moment she did not say anything. Then she put her hand on his face, exactly once, carefully, as though she was confirming that he was real. Okay, she said softly. Okay. The fireworks went on over Co, and the year ended, and they sat together on the back steps while the new year arrived, and it was quiet and specific and entirely theirs. Act 2, The Architecture of Permanence. Chapter 11. The engagement was not a secret for very long. This was not because Issei or Xenovia announced it. Neither of them was inclined toward announcement. It was because they lived in a house full of people who paid extremely close attention, and the ring on Xenovia's left hand was not a subtle object to someone who had spent any amount of time watching those hands during sparring sessions. Aquino saw it first, which surprised nobody. She had a quality of observation that went beyond noticing and into something closer to cataloging, and she was standing at the kitchen counter at 6 in the morning when Xenovia reached past her for a cup and the light caught the white gold band and Aquino set down the tea she was making and turned fully around. That is new, she said. Xenovia looked at her hand. Yes. When? Last night. Aquino was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, and then her smile appeared, not the performed version and not the mischievous version, but the genuinely warm one that she did not produce as often, and that meant more because of it. I am very happy for you, she said. Thank you. Is he awake? He was making tea when I came through. Aquino picked up her cup and went to find Issei, and whatever she said to him in the hallway made him laugh, which Xenovia heard from the kitchen, and she stood with her cup of tea and looked at the ring and felt something that she spent a moment identifying before she recognized it as settled. Not excited, though there was that too somewhere underneath. Settled. Like something she had been carrying at an angle had found its correct position, and could now be carried straight. Asia found out at breakfast. She looked at the ring and looked at Issei and looked at Xenovia, and her expression went through several stages very quickly before arriving at something that was purely happy with no qualification attached. Oh, she said. Oh, I am so glad. She got up and put her arms around Xenovia, which was not something Xenovia had been expecting, and Xenovia held very still for a moment before she put one arm around Asia carefully and patted her shoulder, which was the warmest physical response she was capable of producing before she had been awake for more than an hour. Asia understood this and beamed at her anyway. Rias came down last, as she sometimes did on the mornings after she had stayed up reviewing correspondence, and she stood in the kitchen doorway reading the room before she had seen the ring, because Rias Gremory had always been able to read a room, and the room said something had shifted. Then she saw Xenovia's hand and she was quiet for a moment, and Issei watched her face and felt the familiar apprehension and the familiar affection that always coexisted when he was watching Rias navigate something that cost her something. She crossed the kitchen and took Xenovia's hand and looked at the ring. It suits you, she said finally. Simple and precise. He chose it, Xenovia said. Rias looked at Issei across the kitchen, and something passed between them that was too layered to fully name, the long history of what they had been to each other, and what they had decided to be to each other now, and the respect that lived inside all of it. Of course he did, Rias said, and poured her own tea, and sat down at the table, and the morning went on around them with its ordinary warmth. Chapter 12. The news reached the broader supernatural community through the specific mechanism by which all news in the broader supernatural community reached everyone. Seraphal Leviathan was told. Seraphal had a relationship with information that was equal parts enthusiasm and strategic deployment, and she had also, at some point in the preceding months, developed an opinion about Issei and Xenovia that she had apparently been keeping to herself with some difficulty. The moment Xenovia mentioned it to her at a routine administrative meeting, she produced a response of such unrestrained delight that the 3 other people in the room had to excuse themselves. She appeared at the Hyoudou residence 2 days into the new year, in a burst of magical light that materialized in the front garden, which was not the doorbell, and which would have alarmed anyone who did not know Seraphal. Xenovia opened the front door and looked at her. I heard, Seraphal said, and she was vibrating slightly with the effort of containing something. Come in, Xenovia said. Seraphal came in and found Issei and said approximately 12 things in rapid succession, the thrust of which was that she was overjoyed, that she had always known, that she had in fact mentioned to Xenovia in October that she believed this was going to happen, and that she expected to be invited to any ceremony that took place, in detail, with advance notice. We have not planned a ceremony, Xenovia said. Yet, Seraphal said firmly. Yet, Xenovia allowed. Issei made tea for everyone and they sat in the common room, and Seraphal, who was a Lucifer and one of the most powerful beings in the Underworld and also operated at all times like someone who had just discovered that everyone she cared about was in the same room, settled into the couch with her cup and became something closer to a person having a normal conversation. How did he do it? She asked. We sat on the steps outside, Issei said. I told her what I wanted the future to look like. And then I showed her the ring. No speech? I told him I don't like long speeches, Xenovia said. Seraphal looked at Xenovia with an expression of deep appreciation. Most people don't tell them that in time. Inefficiency in communication creates unnecessary ambiguity. I am going to put that on something, Seraphal said. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. Xenovia is pleased, by the way. He thinks it is good for relations between the Gremory peerage and the independent operators. He would think about it that way, Issei said. He also thinks you are very good for his sister, and that she has been happier this year than the year before, and he is grateful to you for that, and he was not going to say any of that directly because he is Sir's, but I am saying it because someone should. The room was quiet for a moment. Tell him thank you, Issei said. I will tell him you said exactly the right thing, Serafal said, which was not quite the same thing and was in fact more generous, and she drank the rest of her tea and departed in another burst of light from the front garden, and the house was a little quieter without her in the way that a room was quieter after a warm wind moved through it. Chapter 13. The question of a ceremony was more complicated than it appeared, and the complication was interesting rather than burdensome, which was how Xenovia approached most problems that were genuinely interesting. She was not a member of the church anymore. This was not a wound that she carried so much as a fact she had integrated, the way she had integrated the fact that God was dead, the way she had integrated becoming a devil, the way she had integrated everything about the past 2 years that would have been unthinkable to the girl she had been at 14, kneeling on cold stone in a training room and believing with all of her heart in a hierarchy that had, it turned out, a number of significant structural flaws. The church's ceremonies were not available to her. She was not certain she would have wanted them if they had been. The rituals she had known had been beautiful in their way, but they had also been bound up in a framework that had not been entirely honest with her, and she found that she wanted the ceremony that was going to mark this particular decision of her life to be built from things that were honest. She said as much to Issei one morning in January, over the kitchen table, the way she said most things that she had been thinking about, directly and without preamble. Issei listened, and then he said, "What would honest look like?" She had been thinking about this. People who are real. No ceremony for ceremony's sake. Nothing performed that isn't meant. Words that are actually what I think. That's what you want. That's what I want. What do you want? He was quiet for a moment, looking into his tea. He did this thing when he was thinking carefully about something, this small stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness, a quality of being fully inside the thought rather than sitting next to it. Something I can remember clearly, he said. Something that doesn't have so much noise around it that I lose the actual thing. I want to remember the moment, not the production. Then we agree. We agree on a lot of things. We agree on the things that matter, she said, which was a distinction she maintained carefully. Agreeing on everything was not a quality she trusted. It usually meant one person was being quiet. She and Issei disagreed about a number of things, training philosophy, the correct way to organize the pantry, whether it was necessary to respond immediately to social invitations or whether 2 days was a reasonable interval, and the disagreements were functional. They moved through them and arrived somewhere, and the somewhere was usually better than the starting position. Irina, she said. Issei looked up. What? I want Irina there. She is my oldest friend. Whatever we do, she should be there. He nodded, and his expression was the warm one, the specific one he had that was about understanding rather than sympathy. Of course. She pulled out her phone and sent Irina Hyoudou a message that said, I am engaged. You are invited. Details to follow. Irina's response arrived in 11 seconds. It was mostly composed of capitalized words and a considerable number of punctuation marks and was entirely characteristic of her, and Xenovia read it, and felt something quiet and particular that was, she recognized after a moment, affection. She set the phone down and picked up her tea. She's happy, she told Issei. I could hear it from here, he said, because Irina's notification sound had been audible across the table. Xenovia permitted herself a small smile. Chapter 14. Irina arrived on a Saturday with a bag that was significantly larger than a weekend bag and with an energy that filled the front hallway of the Hyoudou residence the way a warm current fills a cold room. She embraced Xenovia for a long time, which Xenovia permitted, and then she held Xenovia at arm's length and looked at her the way she always looked at her when she was checking something important. You are happy, Irina said. I am, Xenovia said. Good. Show me the ring. Xenovia showed her the ring, and Irina looked at it with an expression that moved through evaluation and arrived at approval. Simple, Irina said. It's very you. That was the intention. He did well. Irina looked past Xenovia's shoulder toward the interior of the house. Where is he? Kitchen. Irina moved past her into the house with the ease of someone who had been here before and knew where things were, which she had and did, and found Issei in the kitchen and said a number of things to him that were complimentary and enthusiastic and contained at least one sentence that was clearly meant as a warning dressed as a compliment, which Issei received with the slight smile he had when he understood exactly what was being communicated. That evening the household sat together after dinner, which happened sometimes when there was no pressing business, when the day had been gentle enough that everyone had the energy to simply be in the same space. Irina had folded herself into the couch next to Asia, who was delighted to have her, and the two of them were involved in a quiet conversation that occasionally produced soft laughter. Aquino was reading. Rias was at the desk with something that might have been correspondence but might have been the book she had been working through for the past month, and was approaching the end of. Xenovia was on the floor with her back against the couch, a training manual open across her knees. Issei was next to her with his back against the same couch, reading nothing but present in the way he was present when he was comfortable, loose and attentive. At some point his shoulder came against her shoulder, and stayed there. Xenovia did not adjust away from it. She continued reading the training manual, and the room continued around them, and the contact was simple and warm and said exactly what it meant, which was the only kind of thing either of them particularly wanted. Irina, she noticed without looking up, had gone quiet in the middle of her conversation with Asia and was looking at them with an expression that Xenovia recognized as the one Irina made when she was storing something for later. Xenovia caught her eye over the edge of the manual. Irina smiled at her, and the smile was old and specific and meant, "I see you. I see that you are happy. I have always wanted this for you." Xenovia looked back at her manual. She acknowledged, very happy. Chapter 15. February brought a threat, because threats arrived regardless of whether a person was engaged or planning a ceremony or simply trying to get through a Tuesday. The Occult Research Club received intelligence from Azazel at the governor's offices. A faction of stray devils who had been building towards something for several months had chosen the Ko area as their operational ground, and their numbers were larger than the usual scattered individuals who wandered into the territory. 12 at minimum. Possibly more. They had organized around a former high-ranking devil who had defected from a noble house under circumstances that were, according to Azazel's notes, complicated. His name was Valthros. He had served a minor noble house in the Underworld's eastern territories, a capable strategist who had concluded at some point that the power structure he served was corrupt, and had taken matters into his own hands in ways that had made him astray and made the house he had served very interested in having him not exist anymore. He had been gathering followers for 8 months, and his followers were not the desperate drifters who usually made up stray factions. They were specific and chosen and skilled. Rias laid out the intelligence at the club-room table, and the peerage absorbed it. 12 confirmed, she said. Azazel estimates 17 to 20 overall. They have been using the warehouse district on the eastern edge of the city as a base. She tapped the map. They have not initiated direct contact, but 3 of the signatures we have been tracking were picked up near the commercial district yesterday evening, which means they are no longer being careful about staying contained. What is their objective? Issei asked. Unknown. Valthros is not communicating and his faction does not have the kind of external contacts that would give us indirect intelligence. What we know is their capability, not their intent. Capability is enough to plan from, Xenovia said. Agreed. Rias looked around the table. I want to handle this carefully. Valthros is not a simple stray. He is organized and he has a strategic mind, and I would rather resolve this without significant destruction in Koa's civilian areas. The planning took the rest of the afternoon. Xenovia and Issei worked the approach vectors while Kiba Hyoudou mapped the warehouse district's sight lines and Kaneko Tuja provided structural assessments she had made in the past month during her routine territory checks. Asia prepared her kit with the particular focused quiet she had when serious work was incoming, the version of her that was not less warm but was differently warm, like a candle in a lantern rather than an open flame. They moved at midnight, which was Rias's preference for operations that required discretion, and the eastern warehouse district was exactly what the maps had suggested. Wide buildings with long shadows between them and a cold February wind that came off the hills and moved through the gaps in a way that played with sound. Valthros knew they were coming. This was clear from the first 30 seconds, when the entry point Kaneko had identified as structurally compromised had been reinforced, and the sight lines Kiba had mapped had been interrupted by repositioned obstacles. Someone had assessed their likely approach and prepared for it. He is actually a strategist, Xenovia said quietly, over the communication they maintained through low-range demonic resonance. Change of approach, Rias said. Issei, Xenovia, south entrance. Kiba, take the roof. Kaneko, hold the perimeter. Asia, with me at the west. Issei and Xenovia moved together through the shadow of the nearest building without discussion, because they had been training together for 5 months now and they had developed the kind of spatial understanding between fighters that was built from shared repetition. She moved to his left where she had always moved because it kept Durandal's arc clear of his scale mail, and he watched the right where his own arc was strongest, and they came to the south entrance, and he put his hand on the door. 3 on the other side, she murmured, reading the demonic pressure signatures. 1 elevated. I'll take the elevated one first. I will be right behind you. The door came open and they moved through it, and the fight was brief and specific, not the drawn-out combat of raiding games with their theatrical construction but the compact efficient kind where every action was practical, and where the objective was resolution rather than performance. Issei handled the elevated one in 4 seconds. Xenovia handled the other 2 in the same interval, working around him with the exact spatial awareness she always had. The rest of the operation took 40 minutes. Valthros was in the center of the warehouse complex, and he was exactly what his record suggested, a strategist who was also personally capable, and the engagement with him was hard in a way that the outer layer had not been. He had anticipated their coordination, and he worked to break it, targeting the space between Issei and Xenovia rather than either of them directly. It was a sound tactical decision against most paired fighters. It did not work against these 2. The thing that had developed between them over months of training was not simply a mutual awareness of positioning. It was an understanding of the other person's decision-making, of what they would choose when choices appeared, and so when Valthros drove between them Xenovia did not turn toward Issei for reference because she already knew he would be there, and Issei did not hesitate in his line because he already knew where she was going to be. Valthros found himself caught between 2 people who were operating as one structure. The engagement ended with Valthros contained rather than destroyed, which had been Rias's preference, and he was transferred to Underworld custody the following morning with the quiet efficiency that the supernatural community brought to administrative matters. The peerage went home in the early hours of the morning, and Asia made everyone tea, and they sat around the kitchen table with the particular tired but clean feeling of having done something that needed doing and done it well. His countermeasures were good, Xenovia said, wrapping both hands around her cup. They were, Rias agreed. The one thing he didn't account for was how well we know each other. Most opponents don't account for it, Kiba said. It's not standard. Issei looked at Xenovia across the table. She was looking at her tea, but when she felt his gaze she looked up, and they shared a look that was simply mutual acknowledgement, the kind that said, "We did that, and it worked, and we both know what it came from." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers for a moment. She turned her hand over under his and held it, and nobody at the table pretended not to notice, and the kitchen was warm. Chapter 16. March arrived and with it the first serious conversation about the wedding. It had been a topic operating in the background for 2 months, approached occasionally, and then set aside when other things required attention. But Irina had returned for a weekend visit and had brought with her the particular energy she had when she had been thinking about something for a long time and had assembled thoughts that she felt needed to be expressed. She sat across from Issei and Xenovia at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she was not drinking and said, "You need to actually plan something." "We have been planning," Xenovia said. "You have been having opinions about planning." "There is a difference." Issei looked at Xenovia. Xenovia looked at Issei. Neither of them disputed this. "Fine," Xenovia said. "What do you think we should do?" Irina had been waiting for this and produced, from the bag she had brought, a small notebook that was clearly not new and that had tabbed sections. Issei stared at it. Xenovia stared at it. "You've been planning our wedding," Xenovia said. "I have been preparing options," Irina said with dignity. "Which is different. I have not made decisions. I have organized the space in which decisions can be made efficiently. That is exactly what planning is. Do you want to see the notebook or not? They saw the notebook. Irina had organized it into sections: location, timing, the question of officiation, which was genuinely complicated given the parties involved, guest structure, and what she had labeled practical considerations, which turned out to mean the reality that at least some of the people likely to attend were supernatural beings of considerable power, and that the venue needed to be structurally adequate. You wrote a load-bearing capacity consideration for wedding guests, Issei said. Seraphal Leviathan will be there, Irina said. I have accounted for this. Issei looked at the notebook for a moment. Then he said, I love this notebook. Irina beamed at him. They worked through it over 2 hours, and the picture that emerged was this: late spring, outdoors in a location that had been part of the Gremory estate's grounds, which Surzex had already quietly indicated was available should they want it. Small. 50 people at most, and that was generous. The officiation question was resolved by Sona Citri, who pointed out when consulted that in Devil Society the ceremony of bonding was a witness declaration rather than a religious rite, and that the declaration itself was what mattered, not the framework around it, and that she was qualified to witness it in an official capacity. What do you want to say? Irina asked, looking at Xenovia. Xenovia was quiet for a moment. The truth, she said. What I actually think. Why I chose this person specifically, not in general terms. I want the same thing, Issei said. Irina wrote this down in the notebook. Then you both write your own. No showing each other until the day. Agreed, Xenovia said. Agreed, Issei said. Irina capped her pen with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully moved a large thing from one place to another, and set down her notebook. Now, she said, tell me there is something to eat in this house. Chapter 17. Writing his vows turned out to be the most difficult thing Issei had attempted in a year that had included multiple high-risk combat operations and the navigation of a genuine emotional landscape that would have been beyond him 2 years ago. He understood that it was difficult because it mattered. Things that mattered were difficult in a specific way, not the difficulty of fighting a strong opponent or the difficulty of learning a complex technique, but the difficulty of being accurate about something internal, of taking what was true and finding the words for it that were not just approximately true but actually true, true in the specific way the thing itself was true. He had started 4 times. The first attempt had been too general, the kind of thing that could have been said to anyone and meant nothing specific. The second attempt had overcorrected and become so specific that it read like a report. The third attempt had found a tone he liked but had run too long, because he kept adding things that were true and not realizing until they were written that they were true, which was one of the ways writing differed from speaking. He was on the 4th attempt now, and it was March, and the ceremony was in May, and he had approximately 6 weeks, which felt both like a long time and like nothing at all. He was sitting in the kitchen late at night, the rest of the house asleep, with a sheet of paper in front of him and a pen he had been holding for 20 minutes without using. He thought about what he wanted to say. He wanted to say, I have spent a lot of my life wanting to be someone worth something, without being entirely sure what worth something meant. I wanted to be strong enough. I wanted to be the kind of person who protected the people around him. I had a general idea of the direction, but not a specific picture of what it looked like. He wanted to say, you showed me the specific picture. Not by explaining it, but by being it. The way you move through the world, direct and honest and without any decoration on the things that matter, that is what it looks like to actually mean what you do. I learned things from watching you that I could not have been told. He wanted to say, I am choosing you and I will keep choosing you, not because of what you are in a general sense but because of who you specifically are, because you tell me the truth and you stand at my left because you have learned the arc of my right side and you noticed the crow in the yard in December, and told me about it the next morning because you thought I would want to know. He wrote. He crossed things out. He wrote again. At 2 a.m. he had something that was shorter than he expected and more honest than he had managed in 3 previous attempts, and he read it back to himself in the quiet kitchen, and it sounded like him, actually like him rather than like what he thought a person was supposed to sound like, and he folded it, and put it in the drawer, and went to bed. Across the house, Xenovia was also awake, also writing. And he did not know this, but the house knew it in the way houses know things, in the particular quality of its quiet. Chapter 18. April was a month of small things, which were not small, Issei's parents were told. This was a conversation he had been working toward for a while, not because he thought it would go badly but because it mattered and things that mattered deserved their own space rather than being folded into a passing visit. His mother sat at the kitchen table of his childhood home and listened to him explain the situation with an expression that he knew very well, the expression she had when she was absorbing a great deal of information very quickly and was waiting until she had the full picture before she responded. His father was at the other end of the table, leaning back slightly, which was how he sat when he was comfortable but paying close attention. When Issei finished, his mother said, "The girl with the blue hair." "Yes. She came to dinner in November. She ate everything on her plate and helped with the dishes without being asked." "Yes." His mother nodded once. "I liked her," she said, in the tone that was not a small endorsement from a woman who was specific about who she liked. "I know," his father said. "Are you sure about this, son?" "Yes. Not because of anything wrong with her. Because I want to know if you're sure." "I am sure," Issei said. "I have been sure for a while. I am not someone who second-guesses things once I know them, and I know this." His father looked at him for a moment, and then he nodded, and it was the nod that meant, "I believe you, and I am satisfied." His mother reached across the table and put her hand on his. "Bring her for dinner on Sunday," she said. "Properly. Not as a guest, as someone we are getting to know." He brought Xenovia for dinner on Sunday. She sat at the same table where she had sat in November, and she was the same as she had been in November, direct and present and honest, the same person in his parents' kitchen as she was anywhere else, which was the thing about her that mattered most. She answered his mother's questions without deflecting, and she asked her own questions in return, genuine ones, about how his parents had met, and what the neighborhood had been like when his father was young, and she listened to the answers with the attention she gave everything that interested her. After dinner she helped with the dishes again, standing at the sink beside his mother while his father and Issei sat at the table, and he could hear them talking, low and easy, two people who were direct with each other by nature finding that they got along. His father leaned across the table. "She's good for you," he said quietly. "I know," Issei said. "She's also good in herself. That matters. You want someone who is good in themselves, not someone who is only good for you. The two things look the same sometimes and they're not." Issei looked at his father, who was not a man who said a great many things but who said the right things when he said them. "I know," he said again, and meant it fully. Chapter 19. Kaneko found Xenovia in the training room a week before the ceremony, which was a Tuesday afternoon when the rest of the house was occupied with various activities. Kaneko sat on the bench along the wall, which was the bench she sat on when she was going to say something specific, and she watched Xenovia run through a solo drill with the training sword, and she waited. Xenovia ran through the drill twice and then stopped and looked at her. "Something on your mind," Xenovia said. "A few things," Kaneko said. She was quiet for another moment in the way she was quiet, fully and without apology, before she said what she was going to say. "I want to tell you something before the ceremony." "All right. I trust you with him." She said it plainly, the way she said everything. "I have not always found it easy to trust people with things that matter to me. I don't do it by default. I'm telling you specifically because I mean it specifically." Xenovia set the training sword down and sat on the bench beside her, which left 2 feet of space between them, which was the appropriate distance for a conversation that was personal but not the kind that required proximity. "Why?" she asked, not dismissively, genuinely. Kaneko thought about it. "Because you don't want anything from him he hasn't chosen to give. I have watched you for months and you have never once tried to get something from him by being indirect about it. You just say what you want, and then you leave the choice to him. That's rare." Xenovia absorbed this. "He matters to you," she said. "He matters to everyone in this house." "No," Xenovia said carefully. "Not the same way. To some of them he matters in layers. To you it is simpler. He was kind to you when being kind to you cost him something. That kind of thing settles." Kaneko looked at the far wall for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "I will not ask you to trust me as a permanent position," Xenovia said. "Trust is built over time, and I have not been here long enough for the kind you're describing to be fully established. But I will tell you what I can. I am not going to stop being the person he said yes to. I do not know how to be someone different depending on what is convenient for me. I only know how to be what I am. Kaneko looked at her. I know, she said. That's why I trust you. They sat in the training room for another few minutes and then Kaneko got up and left, and Xenovia sat alone for a while longer, and outside the window the April afternoon was doing the thing April afternoons did, being indecisively between winter and spring in a way that was somehow more honest than full spring, and she sat with it, and felt, underneath the training and the discipline and the preparation and all of it, entirely settled. Chapter 20. The day before the ceremony was quiet by agreement. Irina had arrived 2 days earlier and had managed the final practical details with the notebook and the particular organizational energy she had when a project she had been working on for months was approaching completion. The Gremory estate's grounds had been prepared. The guest list had been confirmed. The structure of the afternoon had been set. The day before, nobody scheduled anything. Issei spent the morning in the training room alone, which was not something he usually did. He preferred training with other people, but he wanted the physical straightforwardness of it, the clarity of just moving, and he worked through forms for 2 hours until he felt clean and present. Xenovia went for a walk through Ko, also alone, also by preference. She walked the route she had been walking for months, through the park near the school and down the long street with the old buildings and up to the hill where on a clear day you could see a significant portion of the city, and she walked it slowly, not as exercise but as something else, as a way of looking at the place where she had arrived without intending to arrive and had then found things she had not known she was looking for. She had come to Ko because Rias had taken her as a bishop. She had stayed in Ko because she had nowhere else that was hers. She had built something in Ko over the course of 2 years that was hers in a way she had never had before, not the institutional belonging of the church with its hierarchy and its borrowed identity, but something she had made by showing up as herself and finding that herself was enough. Tomorrow she was going to stand in a place and say words to a person, and those words were going to be the most honest words she had ever organized into a sequence. And she found standing on the hill in the April wind looking at the city, not nervous but present. Present in the way that moments that matter made you present. She walked back down the hill and through the park and along the long street and back to the house. Issei was in the kitchen. He heard her come in and looked up from the counter where he was cutting something for lunch. How was it? Good, she said. Quiet. I wanted to look at the city. Me too, kind of. I went to the training room. Different approach, same thing. He nodded. Are you ready? She sat down at the table and thought about this, actually thought about it, the honest internal answer rather than the socially adequate one. Yes, she said. I have been ready since December. Tomorrow is not the readiness, it is the saying so. He set down the knife he was holding and looked at her across the kitchen, and the afternoon was ordinary around them, the sounds of the house and the light through the curtains, and somewhere outside a bird going about its business, and he felt everything that he had been building towards settle into something complete. Same, he said. She nodded. He picked up the knife. He finished making lunch. They ate it together in the kitchen with the afternoon going on around them, and it was ordinary and specific and entirely good. Chapter 21. The day itself was the 3rd Saturday in May. The Gremory estate had a garden behind the main building that was surrounded by low stone walls and old trees that had been there long enough to have their own presence, and in May these trees were in full leaf and the light came through them in the specific, particular way that light through May leaves had, warm and green, filtered and clean. The space held 50 people without crowding. 43 had come. Surzek's Lucifer was there with Graphia, who stood at his left with her characteristic stillness, and watched the proceedings with an expression that those who knew her well understood to be warm. Sarah Fall was there, and was managing herself with what was clearly considerable effort, the effort of someone who wanted very much to express themselves and had agreed to be restrained. Sona Citri stood at the front in a formal capacity, composed and prepared. Michael had sent a representative, which was its own kind of statement given the involved parties. Irina stood at Xenovia's side and was not crying. She had made this commitment to herself the day before. She was not going to cry. She was completely fine. She was completely fine. Asia was in the second row, and she was not pretending to be anything other than exactly what she was, which was someone who was enormously happy and whose eyes were slightly bright about it, and the people on either side of her found this entirely understandable. Rias sat in the first row on the other side, composed in the way she was composed when she had done the internal work and arrived somewhere she had chosen. She wore deep red, which suited her, and her expression when she looked at the two people standing at the front was the expression of someone who loved both of them and had made peace with that being a complicated and also genuine thing. Aquino was beside her, and Aquino was looking at nothing in particular with a faint smile that suggested she was simply glad to be in the same space. Kaneko was at the end of the row, small and self-contained, and she was watching with eyes that were entirely present. Issei stood at the front in a dark suit that he had spent an uncomfortable afternoon selecting with Kiba's assistance, and that fit him correctly, which Kiba had insisted was the only acceptable outcome. He stood the way he stood when he was grounded and certain, not stiff but solid, his weight settled. Xenovia came through the garden in white, which was not the traditional white of ceremonies she had once known but a cleaner white, simpler, the white of something that was not performing a history but had chosen its own. Her blue hair was down, which was not how she usually wore it, and the light through the May trees caught the color of it and made it luminous. She walked at her own pace, which was not slow and not fast, which was the pace of someone who knew where they were going and was going there without theater. She reached the front and stood across from Issei and looked at him. He looked back. They had not seen each other that morning, by the agreement Irina had organized, and so this was the first looking since the day before in the kitchen, and it was a full look, the kind where you see the person rather than your expectation of the person, and what they both saw was simply the other one, present and chosen and specific. Sona spoke the formal words that opened the devil's ceremony of witness declaration, precise and clean, and then she said, "The declarations." Issei took his folded paper from his pocket. He had read it so many times he did not need it, but he wanted it in front of him because the words on it were the words he had arrived at, and he wanted to give them the respect of being looked at. He said, "I have spent most of my life knowing the direction I wanted to go without having a specific picture of what it looked like when I got there. I knew I wanted to protect people. I knew I wanted to be worth something. I did not know what worth something actually meant in practice, the day-to-day version of it, what it looked like on a Tuesday. You showed me. Not by explaining it, but by being it. Watching you move through the world, honest and direct and without any decoration on the things that matter, that is what it looks like to actually live by what you believe. I learned from that. I am still learning from that. I choose you specifically. Not the idea of you. You. The way you correct my footwork. The way you told me the tree had even branches. The way you said thank you after the raiding game last fall and meant it completely, and there was nothing else in it. The way you are exactly the same person in every room you enter. I choose all of that specifically every day. I am going to keep choosing it. The garden was very quiet. The light through the trees moved slightly with a breath of wind. Xenovia took her own paper. She looked at it for a moment. She folded it and put it in the small pocket at her side, and when she looked up she was looking at him, and what she said without looking anywhere else. I did not know what it was like to be known, she said. I had been around people my entire life, in the church and in the field and in training, and I was visible to all of them, but visible is not the same as known. To be known is to have someone look at what you actually are and respond to that, not to what they need you to be or what the situation calls for or what they assumed before they looked. You looked. From the beginning, before I had said anything worth looking at, you looked and you responded to what you found rather than what you expected. I did not know how much that mattered until I had experienced it. I know now. I am not easy to be close to. I know this. I do not soften things that I think should not be softened, and I keep my own counsel on things that I have not yet decided, and I take up a great deal of space with what I am without always having room to explain it. You have never once required me to be something smaller. You have never looked at the way I am and suggested that I adjust it for your comfort. I choose you because you are exactly yourself, and you have let me be exactly myself, and I did not know until you that those two things could exist in the same place. I am going to spend the rest of my life being exactly what I am, and you will be exactly what you are, and we will be those two specific things together. That is what I want. That is what I am choosing. The garden was completely quiet. Irina was crying. She had not been going to cry. She was crying. Asia was crying too, the quiet kind, both hands folded in her lap and tears running straight down her face with absolute dignity. Rias was not crying, but her expression was the one that came after you have felt something fully and absorbed it completely, and it was the most open her face had been in months. Sarah Fall had given up on restraint approximately 30 seconds into Issei's declaration, and was working through a small handkerchief with great purpose. Sona said the words that completed the witness declaration, and the ceremony was done, and Issei and Xenovia looked at each other in the May garden with the light in the leaves and the quiet and the people who had come because they mattered, and it was exactly what they had both said they wanted. Specific. Honest. Entirely theirs. He took her hand. She held it. That was all, and it was everything, and the garden went on around them in the warm afternoon, and the people who loved them sat in the light, and there was no performance in any direction, just the simple, complete fact of two people who had chosen each other, and said so, plainly, in front of everyone they cared about. Chapter 22. The afternoon after the ceremony was gentle. There was no formal reception in the traditional sense, which had been a deliberate decision, a table of food in the garden, the kind that people moved around rather than sat formally at, conversation that arrived and departed without being managed. Serzex moved through the space with a warmth that his public functions rarely showed and spent 20 minutes talking with Issei's father, who had come with Issei's mother on a day they had taken in with the specific combination of wonder and groundedness that they seemed to bring to most of the extraordinary things that had become part of their son's life. Issei's mother found Xenovia near the edge of the garden where the old trees met the wall, and where it was a few degrees cooler and quieter. Xenovia had come there after an hour of conversation because an hour of sustained conversation was approximately her capacity in social settings before she needed a few minutes of quiet, which she had mentioned to Issei, and which he had immediately understood and never questioned. Issei's mother stood next to her and looked at the old trees. He wrote those words himself, she said. I know. He worked on them for a long time. He didn't tell me this, but I could tell. He had that look he gets. Xenovia turned to look at her. The still look, his mother said. When he is entirely inside something he is working out. He has had it since he was very small. His father has it too. She smiled, and the smile was private and warm, the smile of someone who has had a very long time to know something and has not gotten tired of it. He is not very complicated, you know. He seems like he might be from the outside, with everything that has happened to him. But he is not. He wants a few specific things and he wants to deserve them. Once he has decided something is worth fighting for, he does not look for the exit. I know, Xenovia said. I know you know. His mother looked at the trees again. I am saying it because I want you to hear me say it. He is going to be good to you. Not perfectly, nobody is perfect, but genuinely. And I think you are going to be good for him in ways that I could not have planned for him, and would not have known to want. Xenovia stood with this for a moment. It was the most generous thing anyone who loved him had said to her, and it was generous in a specific way, person to person, without agenda. Thank you, she said. Thank you, his mother returned, and she meant it, and Xenovia knew she meant it. They stood by the old trees together for another minute, looking at the garden where the people they both loved were moving in the afternoon light, and then his mother said, Come on, I want to introduce you to your husband's favorite aunt before she leaves, and Xenovia went with her back into the warmth of the afternoon. Chapter 23. Summer arrived. The household had shifted slightly in its arrangement, the way households shifted when the people in them shifted, not dramatically but by degrees, new routines occupying the spaces where old uncertainties had been. The rooms were still the same rooms. The training grounds were still the same grounds. The kitchen was still the kitchen where Saturday mornings happened. The difference was harder to locate in any specific thing. It was more a quality of the air between people, the way the air between people who have resolved a long uncertainty felt different from the air between people who were still living inside it. Rias noticed it before she named it, which was how she usually worked. She had spent the spring doing the ongoing internal work of adjusting her own understanding of her feelings and of the situation, and she had arrived at something that was not resignation but was also not what she had once wanted, and that occupied a third category she was still learning the shape of. It was, she thought, something like clarity. She had been honest with herself about what she had felt, and about what she had chosen, and the choosing had been a real choice, and that made the thing she had chosen real. She had chosen to love the people in her house, including both of them, and she had chosen to want their happiness. And having made that choice, she found that the happiness that was now visible between them did not diminish her but extended her. This was more complicated to feel than to describe. But she felt it. She was in the common room one summer evening when Issei came through from the kitchen and stopped next to her chair on his way somewhere and said, "Are you all right?" Not asking it the way people asked it as a conversational opening. Asking it the way he asked things, directly, meaning exactly what the words said. "Yes," she said. And then, because he had asked it the way he asked things and deserved an honest answer, "I am better than I was. I am continuing to be better. I think I am going to be very well." He looked at her for a moment. "Good," he said. "I want that. I want that specifically." "I know you do." She looked up at him from her chair. "Issei, I want you to know that I am glad you are in my life, in the form that is true right now rather than any form I wanted before. I am glad you are exactly who you are. I think you are one of the genuinely good ones." He stood there for a moment, and the thing that moved across his face was not performed. It was the kind of move that he was when something real reached the real part of him. "Thank you, Rias. Go be with your wife," she said, and smiled, and meant it. He went. She sat in the common room for a while longer, and the summer evening went on outside the windows, and she felt the clarity she had been building toward, clean and present and hers. Chapter 24. The news arrived in August. Xenovia told him in the morning, at the kitchen table, without ceremony. "I am going to need to adjust my training schedule," she said. Issei looked up from his tea. "I am pregnant." He set down his tea. "I confirmed it yesterday with Asia. I wanted to be certain before I said anything." She was looking at him with the open, careful look she had when she was monitoring the effect of information, and waiting for the real response rather than the first one. Issei was quiet for a moment. He was doing the still thing, the thing his mother had described, being entirely inside something he was working out. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said. "Physically. Emotionally I am also fine. I have had since yesterday to be with it." "What did you feel?" "Yesterday." She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she thought about things. "I felt something I did not have a word for. Not fear. Not exclusively anything. I think the word might be vast. It felt vast. Large in both directions." He got up from his side of the table and came around and sat in the chair next to her, not across from her but next to her, close, shoulder to shoulder the way they sat when they were on the same side of something. "I feel that too," he said. "Right now." "Vast." "Yes. And also," he said, and the word had something warm in it, "good." "I feel good." She looked at him. He was looking at her, and what was in his face was the face he had when something was genuinely true, unperformed and specific. "I do too," she said. He took her hand on the table. They sat in the kitchen in the August morning, which was warm and ordinary and full of the sounds of the household beginning its day around them, and they were two people who had said yes to each other plainly and specifically and who were now, together, looking at what it meant to have a future that was larger than either of them and entirely shared. The morning went on. The tea cooled. Outside, the summer was at its height, and it was, Xenovia thought, exactly as good as she had said it would be. Act 3, The Weight of New Things. Chapter 25. The pregnancy changed Xenovia's relationship with her own body in ways she had not anticipated, and she approached these changes the same way she approached everything, by gathering information, forming assessments, and making tactical adjustments. This approach worked better in some areas than others. The first adjustment was to her training. She had expected this. She was a professional and she understood physiology, and she had no interest in anything that carried risk for the person currently occupying her. So she revised the training schedule immediately, cutting the intensity by a third and eliminating the forms that required sudden rotational force on the core. She did not grieve this. It was a temporary modification of a long-term practice, and she was capable of distinguishing between those two things. What she had not anticipated was the tiredness. She had been tired before. She had trained through exhaustion, had run operations on 4 hours of sleep, had spent 3 days in the field once during a particularly complicated assignment for the church with no rest at all and still functioned at full capacity through the discipline of simply not stopping. That tiredness had a quality of the will about it, a thing she could push past because the mechanism was known to her. This tiredness was different. It came from inside and sat behind her eyes and was not addressed by willpower because it was not a failure of will. It was the body redirecting resources. She understood this intellectually, but the experience of it was strange, of sitting down in the afternoon and finding that the afternoon had disappeared and she was waking up in the early evening with her head on the couch cushion and no memory of having decided to sleep. Issei found her like this on a Tuesday in September, and sat down on the far end of the couch, and did not say anything, which was the correct response. He had learned, over the months since January, that her processing of new experiences had its own pace and that the most useful thing he could do when she was inside something was simply be present rather than directing her toward a response she had not yet arrived at. She woke up and looked at him. How long? About 2 hours. She sat up. I did not intend that. I know. I find it unsettling when I do not intend things my body does. That's fair. She looked at the window where the evening was arriving. September evenings had a particular quality in Ko, the light going amber, and the air holding the last of the summer warmth. She had come to know the seasonal qualities of this city the way she had come to know the seasonal qualities of places she had lived before, not sentimentally but practically, as information that helped her understand where she was. Asia says the tiredness is usually strongest in the first few months, she said. That's what I've read too. She looked at him. You have been reading about it? Yes. Since when? Since August. She absorbed this. He had been reading about pregnancy since August, which was when she had told him, which meant he had started immediately, which meant that the information had mattered enough to him to act on right away rather than waiting to be asked or prompted. What have you read? She said. He told her. It was a thorough accounting. He had read about the physiology of it, about the developmental stages, about the practical adjustments that were useful, about the emotional terrain that was common even if not universal. He had also read specific material on half-devil physiology because Asia had helped him find sources, because the child was going to be a half-devil at minimum and possibly more depending on how the sacred gear's influence interacted with developmental biology, which was a category that had approximately 3 reliable sources in the literature. Xenovia listened to all of it. You did all of that in 2 weeks, she said. It felt important to understand the situation. You read about the emotional terrain. Yes. That was not necessary. I thought it was. He looked at her steadily. I want to understand what you are in. Not just the physical version but the full version. I cannot understand it from the inside, so I tried to understand it from the outside. I know that is not the same thing. Xenovia was quiet for a moment. No, she said. It is not the same thing. But it is not nothing. It is, in fact, considerably more than nothing. He nodded. She leaned back into the couch, not toward him exactly but in his direction, and the evening came through the windows and the house went on around them in its ordinary way. I will probably fall asleep again, she said. I know. You do not have to stay. I know, he said again and stayed. Chapter 26. The household reorganized around the pregnancy in the quiet, incremental way that households reorganized around anything that was going to be present for a long time, by small adjustments that accumulated into a new shape. Asia had appointed herself the medical authority on the subject, which she was in the most literal sense since she was a sacred gear user whose healing ability gave her a direct connection to physical states that no ordinary medical professional could match. She had also read everything available on the subject and had assembled a notebook of her own that was different from Irina's notebook in character, less organizational and more encyclopedic, full of information that she had carefully gathered from both human and supernatural sources and cross-referenced with notes and her careful handwriting. She brought this notebook to Xenovia early in October with the manner she had when she was being professionally useful, warm but focused. The child will almost certainly have full devil power from your side, she said, seated across the kitchen table with the notebook open. The sacred gear influence is harder to predict. Drake's legacy in Issei's bloodline is not well documented because there is no precedent for it, but the boosted gear is not a passive artifact. It has its own presence. It is possible the child inherits some quality of that presence. What kind of quality? Xenovia said. That I cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that the child's aura is already distinct. I checked yesterday during the wellness assessment. Asia looked up from the notebook. It is very strong. Not dangerous, just strong. Clear and specific. Clear and specific, Xenovia repeated. Yes. Like someone who already knows what they are. There was something in that which settled in Xenovia's chest in a way that was warm and particular. She had not yet formed a complete picture of who this child was going to be, which was reasonable since the child did not yet exist outside of a developing state, but the description Asia had given was one she recognized in type if not in specific. She had always been clear and specific herself. It was, she thought, a reasonable thing to pass on. Aquino took over the kitchen organization without announcement, and without asking permission, which was how she handled things she had decided were her responsibility. She did not change what was made so much as the structure around it, ensuring there were always things available that were useful for someone who needed food at irregular hours, that certain items were at hand without requiring a full preparation process. She did so with no ceremony and no expectation of acknowledgement. Xenovia acknowledged it anyway, once, directly. The kitchen adjustments, she said, finding Aquino in the hallway on a Thursday morning. Aquino looked at her with the slightly surprised expression she sometimes had when she had been precise and quiet about something and was not expecting it to be noticed. I appreciate them, Xenovia said. Of course, Aquino said, recovering her composure. Then, more genuinely, I want to be useful. I did not want to make a production of it. You were not making a production of it. That is why it worked. Aquino smiled at her, not the performed version, and Xenovia nodded once and went on her way, and the exchange was brief and complete, and said everything it needed to. Rias stopped by Xenovia's room one afternoon and sat in the chair by the window and said, Is there anything you need from me specifically? Not specifically, Xenovia said. The general household support is more than adequate. I do not mean logistically. Xenovia looked at her. I mean personally, Rias said. I am asking because I want to be useful in ways that are actual rather than assumed. I do not know what you need from me because you are not someone who broadcasts that information, and I respect that, but I wanted to create the opening in case there was something. Xenovia considered this for a moment with the genuine consideration she gave things that deserved it. I would like, she said slowly, for you to talk to me the way you talk to the others. Normally. About things that are not about this. I find that the most useful contribution right now is for the people around me to continue being themselves in a normal way, because everything else is not normal, and the contrast helps. Rias absorbed this. Absolutely, she said. And then, I read an interesting paper last week about the historical relationship between 3 underworld noble houses in the 4th era that I have been wanting to discuss with someone who would not find it tedious. Tell me, Xenovia said. Rias told her, and the afternoon passed in conversation about historical underworld politics that was entirely unrelated to pregnancy. And it was, Xenovia found, exactly what she had needed. Chapter 27. October brought a visitor who was not on the expected list. Issei came downstairs one morning to find Drake's voice in his head louder than usual, which was often a prelude to something, and found at the door a figure he had not seen in over a year. Tannen, the former Dragon King who had helped train him and who now occupied a mountainous area of the underworld with the settled contentment of a very powerful creature who had found his preferred arrangement. Tannen was not in his full form, which would not have fit in the residential street, but even the reduced form he had adopted for the visit was substantially larger than a human, and required some spatial negotiation with the front doorway. I heard, Tannen said, with the directness that was simply how dragons communicated. About the baby, Issei said. About everything. The marriage. The child. He looked at Issei with the large, amber-lit eyes that saw things in a way that was not quite human and not quite anything else. I wanted to come. Dragons mark important moments. This is important. Issei stood in his doorway looking at his old teacher, and felt something move through him that was warm and slightly undone by the warmth. "Come in," he said. "We'll figure out the doorway." They figured out the doorway, and Tannen occupied the back garden because it was the only space that comfortably accommodated him, and Xenovia came out and stood before him with the particular quality she had when she was assessing something large and unfamiliar, either intimidated nor performing ease, simply present and calibrating. Tannen looked at her for a long time in the way that dragons looked at things, comprehensively and without filtering. "You are the swordswoman," he said. "Yes. He has spoken of you. And he of you." Tannen made a sound that was the dragon equivalent of a thoughtful hum, which shook the nearby fence slightly. "The child will be interesting," he said. "Dragon blood is not in the usual line of inheritance, but presence carries differently. The child will know what it is. That matters more than lineage." "Knowing what you are," Xenovia said. "Yes. It is the first thing. Some creatures spend their entire lives not knowing. They are the dangerous ones, not because they are powerful but because they are confused. A creature that knows what it is can choose what to do with that. A creature that does not know is only ever reacting." Xenovia stood with this for a moment. It was, she thought, one of the more useful things anyone had said to her since August. "I intend for our child to know what it is," she said. "I know you do," Tannen said. "That is why I came." He stayed through the afternoon, and in the way that old teachers sometimes did, he spent most of the time saying almost nothing at all, simply being present, a large and ancient and comfortable presence in the back garden while the household moved around him, and when he left in the evening it was with the quiet certainty of someone who had checked something important and found it satisfactory. Issei stood in the back garden after Tannen had gone and the garden had returned to its ordinary size, and Xenovia stood beside him. "He approved," she said. "He did. His opinion matters to you." "Very much," Issei said simply. "Then I am glad he came," she said. Chapter 28. November brought the second trimester, and with it a shift in the quality of the days. The tiredness did not disappear but changed its character, becoming less like a weight and more like a presence that could be worked around rather than one that simply arrived and took over. Xenovia returned to a modified training schedule with something that was close to relief. She had understood intellectually that the modification was temporary, but she had not appreciated until it was over how much the training was part of her daily orientation, how much of her sense of who she was lived in the practice of it. She ran forms with Kiba in the mornings because he was the most precise sparring partner in the house and his footwork was a constant useful reference point. She did not do this silently. They talked while they worked, which was something she had always been able to do because training had been sufficiently embedded that the conscious mind could operate in parallel with the physical one. Kiba was a careful conversationalist in the best sense. He asked things he was actually curious about and he listened to the answers. He had been part of the household long before she had arrived and knew it, and everyone in it with the depth that came from that length. And he had the quality of someone who cared about the people around him in a way he expressed primarily through attention rather than declaration. "You seem different," he said, one morning in the second week of November, running through a counterform on her left. "Different how?" she said, adjusting her line. "More settled." "I do not mean calmer. You have always been calm. I mean something under the calm is different." Like a question got answered. She thought about this while they ran the form. It was an accurate description. There had been something that operated in her for a long time that she had not identified as a question because she had not known it was looking for an answer, some background state of the not quite belonging that she had carried from the church and from the field and from the years of being defined entirely by what she could do rather than who she was. "I belong here," she said, at the end of the form's circuit. "That is what is different. I did not fully know that before. Now I do." Kiba was quiet for a moment, and then he nodded once, and the nod had in it the kind of satisfaction that came from watching something find its correct position. "I am glad," he said. "So am I," she said, and meant it in a way that was not dramatic but was full. They ran the form again from the beginning, and the November morning was bright and cold through the training room windows, and Xenovia felt the belonging like a ground under everything else, stable and specific, built from the accumulation of ordinary days. Chapter 29. Issei had a conversation with Drake that he had been expecting and not entirely looking forward to. It happened in the particular space where conversations with Drake happened, not asleep but not fully waking either, the in-between state that was the entry point to the sacred gear's interior, a space that existed somewhere between his consciousness and the dragon's. Drake was as he always was, massive and red and ancient, with eyes the color of deep fire that held in them a kind of intelligence that was not human and not interested in pretending to be. "You are going to be a father," Drake said. "Yes. I have thoughts about this. I expected you would." Drake was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet, like weather being quiet, the presence of a large system at rest. "I have lived inside human hosts for generations. I have watched children born to people I was part of. I have seen what the proximity to this kind of power does to children who grow up in its shadow, and I have seen what it does to children who grow up knowing it honestly. The difference is significant." "Tell me," Issei said. "The ones who grow up in the shadow but not the knowledge become either afraid of what they sense without understanding, or they become hungry for it in a way that is not healthy because they do not understand what they are hungry for. The ones who know grow up with it as a fact rather than a mystery, and facts can be related to, and mysteries cannot." "You are saying tell the child what they are." "I am saying do not make it a mystery. This power has been a mystery for too long to too many people, and mysteries breed wrong relationships with the thing itself. Your child will feel the dragon. They will know something is there. If you say nothing, they will construct their own story about it, and their story will be wrong because they are a child and children do not have the right information. Tell them the true story. Even when they are young. Children understand more than people give them credit for, and more importantly they understand accurately what is explained to them honestly, even if they cannot explain it back in the same terms." Issei thought about this. He thought about himself at 12, the sacred gear already present but completely unknown, the feeling of something vast alongside him that he had no language for, and no one had provided a language for. "I know," he said. "I know exactly what that is like." "I know you do," Drake said. "That is why I am saying it. You already understand what I am describing from the inside. Use that." "I will. There is one more thing." "What?" Drake was quiet for another moment. When he spoke again his voice had a quality that Issei had heard only a few times, a register below the usual one, something older and more deliberate. "I am glad you exist," Drake said. "I have had many hosts. I have not always been glad. You have been worth the time. I want you to know that." Issei sat with this for a long moment in the space between sleep and waking. "Thank you, partner," he said. Drake made a sound that was not quite words and not quite anything else, and the space shifted, and Issei came back to waking, and the room around him was the ordinary bedroom, the morning light coming through the curtain, Xenovia asleep beside him, and he lay there for a while looking at the ceiling and feeling the full weight of everything he was part of and finding that the weight was not heavy in the wrong direction. It was the weight of something that mattered. He had always been able to carry that. Chapter 30. December arrived and with it a particular quality of occasion. The household's end-of-year traditions recurred with their comfortable familiarity: Asia's wreath, Akino's honey cake, Issei's tree. The tree this year was larger than in previous years, which had happened without discussion, and Xenovia had again been with him when he bought it, and the tree he had ended up buying was the one she had identified in under 5 minutes as structurally superior to the others. "You have very strong opinions about trees," he said, carrying it home. "I have very strong opinions about things that should have even weight distribution," she corrected. "You know, in most contexts that would not make the tree more charming, but somehow it does." She looked at him sideways. "You are getting sentimental about trees," she said. "I am getting sentimental about the person I buy trees with," he said. She considered this. "That is marginally more acceptable," she said, and carried her half of the pot the rest of the way home without saying anything else. But the shape of her face was the one she had when she had received something well and was holding it carefully. The year's end gathering this year included Irina, who arrived on the 24th with an even larger bag than last time and who looked at Xenovia's considerably more evident pregnancy with an expression of such pure delight that Xenovia had to look away briefly to prevent herself from smiling too much. Sirzex sent a message through Graphia that was formal in structure and genuinely warm in content, expressing the Gremory family's anticipation and their preparedness to assist with anything required. Grafia's addition to the message was a single line in her precise handwriting that said, "The child will be remarkable." This was, from Grafia, the equivalent of several paragraphs from anyone else. On the last evening of December, the household sat together in the common room with its tree and its wreath and the honey cake that was 2/3 gone and the particular feeling that the year's end had, of being simultaneously tired and full in a way that was more like completion than exhaustion. Irina looked around the room at the assembled people, and her face was doing something private and grateful. "1 year ago tonight," she said quietly. "Yes," Xenovia said. "You were sitting on the steps. We were. And now." She gestured at the room, at all of it, the tree and the people and the warmth and the particular quality of a household that had found its shape. "And now," Xenovia agreed. Issei was next to her on the couch, and he had his arm around her, which was still not a default gesture for either of them but which had become possible and natural over the year, and she was leaning into him slightly in the specific way she had learned was comfortable, and the room was warm and full of people who had chosen each other in one way or another. The year turned. Nobody was on the back steps this time because it was cold and because there was no need for the separation of outside. Everything they needed was right here in the room, and that was its own kind of ending and beginning, the kind that did not require ceremony because it was already complete. Chapter 31. January of the second year of their marriage was quieter than most months preceding it had been, and the quietness was welcome. They had entered the third trimester, which Asia explained with characteristic thoroughness and which Xenovia experienced as a new kind of physical adjustment, the weight distributed differently, the movement requiring more consideration, the body prioritizing its own agenda with a completeness that left little room for anything else. She was not frustrated by this. She had too much respect for what the body was doing to be frustrated by it. But she found herself more interior than usual, which was not uncomfortable exactly but was unfamiliar, as though the focus that she usually directed outward had been partially redirected inward without her permission and was now occupied with things she did not have full access to. She read. She had always read, but in January she read more and more widely, pulling books from Rias's collection that she had passed over before, histories and philosophical texts and 2 novels that Aquino had recommended with the air of someone who expected the recommendation to be declined and was pleasantly surprised when it was not. One of the novels was not what she had expected, it was quieter and more interior than the summary had suggested, and she read it over 3 days and found in it something she had not been looking for, and could not entirely name, but that felt like it had arrived at the right moment. Issei sat with her in the evenings while she read, reading his own things or doing his own thinking, and the evenings had the quality that the best evenings had, of 2 people being fully themselves in the same space without needing the space to be anything other than what it was. "What are you thinking about?" she said one evening, looking up from the novel. He had been looking at the ceiling with the still expression. "Names," he said. "We have discussed names." "I know. I was thinking about them again." They had, in fact, had several conversations about names, which had been among the more interesting conversations they had had because the conversations revealed something about what each of them valued without either of them having to say directly what they valued. Issei gravitated toward names that were strong but not heavy, that carried weight without demanding acknowledgement of the weight. Xenovia gravitated toward names that were clear, that said exactly one thing and said it without decoration. The intersection of these preferences turned out to be a fairly specific category. "I keep coming back to one," he said. "Which one?" He said it. Xenovia was quiet for a moment. She looked at the ceiling, which she did when she was forming an honest response rather than an immediate one. "Yes," she said. "Yes?" "Yes. That is the name." He looked at her. "It is strong and it is clear and it does not try to be anything other than what it is," she said. "It is the correct name." He smiled, and it was the real one, the one that went all the way through. "Okay," he said. She went back to her novel. He went back to the ceiling. The name sat between them in the room, specific and settled, belonging to a person who was almost here. Chapter 32. The birth happened in February, on a morning that began with snow and ended clear. It was Asia who was with her when the morning made its intentions known, because Asia had been monitoring the situation with the attentiveness she brought to everything medical, and she was the one who came and found Issei and told him in the precise and calm voice she used for important information that it was time. The household assembled around the edges of the situation with the particular quality they had in emergencies, focused and quiet, and each person occupying their specific function. Rias managed the external communications, sending word to the people who needed to know, and holding off the people who did not need to be in the way. Aquino prepared everything that needed preparing and kept the house functioning around the central event. Kiba was simply present, doing whatever was useful, which turned out to be more than he had anticipated. Issei was with Xenovia. He had thought about this before, what he would be in the room, what she would need from him, and he had arrived at the same answer he arrived at for most things that mattered: be present. Pay attention. Do not try to manage or direct or anticipate. Simply be there and respond to what is actually happening rather than what you think is happening. Xenovia did not ask for things she did not need. This had always been true, and it was true now. What she asked for was his hand, which she took and held with a pressure that communicated clearly what she was experiencing without requiring any other communication, and she breathed the way she had practiced, the deep even rhythm she had been working on for weeks, and she was the most present person Issei had ever been near, so entirely inside the moment that there was nothing else. Asia moved through the room with the complete confidence of someone who was doing the thing they were most fully equipped to do in the world. And then, in the morning hours while the snow outside the windows was turning to the clear winter light that came after snow, the child arrived. He was here. He announced himself with a sound that was small and enormous at the same time, the way everything about a newborn was small and enormous simultaneously. And Asia held him, and he was exactly the size of a beginning, which was the only size that made sense for a beginning. Issei did not have words for what he felt in that moment. He was aware of this as it was happening, that language had temporarily vacated the situation and left only the direct experience, which was the fullest thing he had ever felt and the most specific. Xenovia, who had just done the most significant physical work of her life, looked at the child Asia placed in her arms and was quiet for a moment. That was not an empty quiet but the opposite, a quiet so full that sound would have been less than it. Then she looked at Issei, and what was in her face was the open look, the underneath look, the one she had only in moments when the usual careful structure was not the point, and was not pretending to be. "He is here," she said. "He is here," Issei said. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her, and she leaned against him, and the child was between them in her arms, and the three of them were in the room in the winter morning light, and it was the most ordinary and most extraordinary thing, the way all the genuinely important things were. Asia was very quiet in the corner, doing the things that needed to be done, and her face was the face she had when something she loved was completely itself. Chapter 33. The household met him in the afternoon. They came in order, not because an order had been established but because it simply emerged from the way people navigated towards something important, each one finding their moment. Aquino came first and was, for once in her life, completely without performance. She stood in the doorway and looked at the child with an expression that was simple and direct and private, and then she came in and sat in the chair by the window, and she was there for the space of a breath before she said, quietly, "He has your eyes." "He does," Issei said, which was not entirely accurate yet because newborn eyes were not fully formed, but they were dark and steady and there was something in them that was already paying attention. Kiba came next, and he stood at the bed's edge and looked at the child with the careful, accurate attention he gave to things that mattered, and he said nothing for a long moment before he said, "He looks ready." "For what?" Issei asked. "I don't know yet. He just looks ready for it, whatever it is." Kaneko came and stood very close to the side of the bed and looked at the child with an expression nobody in the room had seen on her face before. It was not soft exactly, it was more specific than soft, as though she was recognizing something. She reached out one finger and the child's hand, which was impossibly small, closed around it, and Kaneko's expression became something that required no interpretation and needed none. She stayed for a long time. Rias came last, and she came in the way she came into important rooms, with her full self, nothing held back, and she sat beside Xenovia on the bed because the chair was occupied and the floor would not have been right, and she looked at the child. "May I?" she said to Xenovia. Xenovia looked at her for a moment, and then held the child out, and Rias took him with the careful competence of someone who had held children before, nephews and children of family friends, and he settled into her arms in the way he had been settling into everything, without resistance, as though every place was fine and this place was also fine. Rias looked down at him. Her face, which Issei had known long enough to read the layers of, was something he had not seen before. It was not the studied grace she brought to difficult things, not the warmth she performed for social situations, not the intelligence she wore like a garment in most rooms. It was something underneath all of those, something that had been there for a long time, and that this small person had simply arrived and located without effort. "Hello," she said to the child, very quietly. "We have been waiting for you." The child looked at her. His dark eyes were steady, and he was, Issei thought, exactly what Tannen had said, clear and specific. Already knowing what he was, or beginning to. Rias held him for a while, and the room was full of the particular warmth of an afternoon that had delivered something irreversible and good, and then she gave him back to Xenovia and stood and looked at Issei. "He is wonderful," she said. Fully. Meaning it without qualification. "Yeah," Issei said. "He is." Chapter 34. The first weeks with the newborn were not what any of them had expected, and they had expected quite a lot. Xenovia had read extensively. Issei had read extensively. Asia had compiled her notebook. And still the actual practice of it was different from the preparation for it in the specific way that all practical things differed from their theoretical versions, because practical things happened in real time with real tiredness and real uncertainty that the theoretical version had not fully accounted for. The child, whose name they had chosen in January, was healthy and vigorous and had opinions about the world that he expressed at considerable volume, particularly between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning. Xenovia handled the nighttime hours with a calm that impressed even her, which was not to say she was not tired. She was very tired, but the tiredness did not translate into the kind of loss of ground she had expected. She had resources for this that she had not known she had. Issei handled the part of every night after she fed the child, taking him and walking the perimeter of the room in the dark with the quiet competence he brought to things he had decided to be good at. He had decided early that he was going to be good at this, and the decision carried him through the 2 o'clock hours and the 3 o'clock hours with the same steadiness he brought to training, the knowledge that endurance was a practice and not a fixed state. The child was, additionally, doing something that Asia documented with great interest and that she explained was consistent with the dual heritage. His aura fluctuated in a way that pure devils did not, and that was not entirely human either. It was not unstable. It was exploratory, as though he was trying out the range of what he had, finding the edges. "He is very curious," Asia said during one of the regular checks in the 3rd week. "About what?" Xenovia said. "Everything. The aura responds to stimulation. When you speak to him, it responds. When Issei holds him, it responds differently than when others hold him. He is already categorizing." "He is 3 weeks old," Issei said. "Yes," Asia said simply. "He is a very busy 3 weeks old." Irina visited at the end of the 3rd week and sat with the child in the common room for an afternoon with the absorbed attention of someone who had been waiting for this for a long time and was now taking it in properly. She held him and talked to him quietly, in the slightly different voice people used with infants, and her face was uncomplicated in the way it rarely was. "He looks like both of you," she told Xenovia. "Equally. That is rare. Usually children look more like one parent." "He has his own face," Xenovia said. Irina looked at the child and then at Xenovia. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly right. He has his own face." She stayed for the week, and the household absorbed her presence as it always did, naturally and with warmth, and on the last day before she left she sat with Xenovia in the kitchen in the early morning while the house was still quiet, and said, "You are good at this." "I do not have a basis for comparison," Xenovia said. "I do. I have watched you do everything you have ever done from when we were young, and you have always had the same quality, of doing the thing fully and without reservation, and you are doing this the same way. You are not performing motherhood. You are just being it." Xenovia looked at her cup. "I was afraid," she said, after a moment, which was a sentence she would not have said to anyone else. "Not during. After. In the 1st week. I was afraid of getting it wrong." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because you are exactly the kind of person who would be afraid of getting something this important wrong." The people who are not afraid are the ones who do not understand what the stakes are. You always understand what the stakes are. Xenovia was quiet. Is the fear gone? Irina asked. Not gone, Xenovia said. Changed. It is now the kind of fear that is also a kind of care. I am learning to carry them together. Irina nodded, slowly. That is what parents do, she said gently. They carry them together. Chapter 35. Spring arrived, and the child was 2 months old, and the world was continuing. This was one of the stranger things about parenthood that Issei had not been prepared for, the way the world continued alongside it. Supernatural matters did not pause because a child had arrived. The Gremory peerage continued to have obligations. The raiding game's schedule continued. There were negotiations in the Underworld that Xerxes was navigating and that had implications for the territories they operated in. There were stray incidents. There were the ordinary ongoing functions of lives that were not ordinary by most measures but had become ordinary to the people living them. Xenovia returned to full training at 3 months, and the return was not painful the way she had quietly feared it might be. She was not starting from a diminished place but from a different one, the body recalibrated and adjusted in ways that were interesting rather than limiting. She was faster than she had been, which surprised her until Asia explained that the body's recalibration after pregnancy often included changes to muscle distribution and joint flexibility that could produce genuine performance improvements. Your body made a person, Asia said. It learned things doing that. This was the most useful framing Xenovia had received. She kept it. The child was, in April, beginning to develop a smile that could be distinguished from the reflexive version that newborns produced without intention. It arrived in response to specific things, his parents' faces, the sound of Kaniko's voice, which for reasons nobody entirely understood produced in him a particular attentiveness that went beyond what he showed to most people, and Asia's hands, which he had always responded to with a calm that suggested the healing quality was somehow perceptible to him. He had also, Asia noted with interest, begun to produce small fluctuations of demonic power when particularly engaged, not controlled, not intentional, simply present in the way that a child's full emotional state was present in everything they did. Issei sat with him one April evening while Xenovia was at a brief Underworld obligation with Rias, and he held the child and talked to him the way he had been talking to him since before he was born, telling him things, not the simplified things that people told infants but real things, actual things, about the day and about what he was thinking and about the world as it actually was. You have a dragon in your family, he told him, on this particular evening. Not a metaphor. An actual dragon. His name is Drake and he is very old and very honest and he has opinions about how to carry important things. You will get to know him when you are old enough to come in here, tapping his left arm lightly. And you will get to know Tannen, who is also a dragon and also very old and who thought you were interesting before you were even born. These are not common resources. You should know you have them. The child looked at him with the dark, steady eyes that were already entirely their own. You also have a mother who is one of the most honest people I have ever met, Issei continued. And that is the most useful thing I can tell you, I think. That honesty is a skill and it is of value and it is possible to live that way, to just say what you mean and mean what you say. And it is not naive, she is not naive, she is one of the most capable and clear-sighted people I know, and she is also just honest. Those things go together. Remember that. The child made a sound that was not language and was also not nothing. Yeah, Issei said. I agree. He sat in the April evening with his son and the house was warm around them and outside the window the first spring night was arriving, and the year was going on, and everything that mattered was exactly where it was supposed to be. Chapter 36. There was a raiding game in May, the first Xenovia returned to full participation in, and she approached it with the careful attention she brought to reassessment. She was different, and she knew it. Not diminished, but different. The modifications of the past year, physical and interior both, had changed the shape of her practice in ways that were not yet fully mapped. She knew this the way a returned traveler knew that the journey had changed them, not as a loss of the prior self but as a presence of something additional that needed to be integrated. She found during the pre-game preparation, sharper on the left. She had always been equally capable on both sides, trained to be, But there was now a specificity on the left that had not been there before, a quality of absolute certainty about that side space that she traced back to months of standing left of Issei, learning his right side arc so well that her left had become a fully inhabited terrain. She mentioned this to him during the preparation, and he listened and said, "I am sharper on the right for the same reason. We have been making each other better," she said. For a while now. The game itself was against the younger noble's team, and it was not the most demanding game the Gremory peerage had played, but it was clean and clear, and Xenovia moved through it with the integrated quality she had been working toward, all the separate components of who she was at this point in her life operating as a single structure rather than as separate systems that needed to be coordinated. She took down the opposing queen in the third quarter with a combination that she had not planned but that arrived out of the present moment, the kind of move that was only possible when there was nothing holding back, when the entire self was available to the situation rather than any part of it being reserved or protected. After the game, in the room where the peerage gathered while the formal proceedings concluded, Issei stood next to her and said quietly, "The combination in the third quarter. Yes. I have not seen you do that before. I have not been able to do that before." She considered how to explain it. There was nothing held back. There is usually something held back, some reserve capacity I keep protected. Tonight there was not. He looked at her with the look he had when he understood something that was not quite articulable. "Because you know what you have to come back to," he said. She thought about this. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly it. When you know what you are coming back to, you can give everything to the moment you are in. The coming back is guaranteed, so the going out fully costs nothing." He nodded slowly. "I feel the same way," he said. They stood in the after-game room while the formal proceedings went on around them, shoulder to shoulder, two people who had learned each other's edges and were better at everything because of it, and outside the window the May evening was beginning, and at home a child was sleeping under the care of the household that had made itself into a family, and the world was, by all relevant measures, very good. Chapter 37. Summer again. The child was 6 months old and had developed a personality that was entirely his own and that was making itself known with increasing specificity. He was curious in the systematic way, not distracted by everything but engaged with whatever he was currently interested in to the exclusion of most everything else. He had a strong opinion about being put down when he was not done with the current investigation. He was responsive to music in a way that surprised nobody given the household he was in, but that was still delightful, going very still and attentive whenever Aquino played anything near him, as though he was taking notes. He was, additionally, developing in ways that were specific to his heritage. The demonic aura was becoming more stable and less exploratory. Asia's regular assessments noted that it had the quality of someone who was learning proprioception, the internal sense of where one's own power was, without which control was not possible. "He is already learning control," Asia told them, in June, with the notebook open. "Not consciously. But the tendency is there. He knows where the edges are." "That is good," Xenovia said. "It is very good. It is not common at this age. It is not common at several years older." "He knows what he is," Issei said, which was Tannen's formulation, and it was the right one. Xenovia looked at him when he said this, and the look had in it a recognition that they were thinking the same thing, which had become a kind of communication all its own. The summer was full in the way that summers were full. The household had its rhythms, and the child had been integrated into them, carried through them, the whole structure adapting to include him the way it had adapted to include everyone who had become part of it over the past several years. There was a particular afternoon in July that Issei would remember later as the image that came to mind when he thought about this time, not because it was dramatic but because it was complete. He was in the back garden with the child, who had recently discovered that he could observe the movement of his own hands with a focus that suggested he found this information extremely interesting. Xenovia was at the table on the small patio with the training manual she had been updating, writing in the margins in her precise handwriting. Asia was in the garden nearby with the flowers she maintained. The afternoon was warm and the light was the summer kind, full and generous. Kaneko appeared in the garden doorway and looked at the assembled scene. She walked out and sat in the grass near Issei and the child without asking or explaining why. The child looked at her immediately with the specific attentiveness he reserved for Kaneko. Hello, she said to him. He reached toward her, which was his current method of expressing interest in things. Kaneko held out her hand and he grabbed 2 of her fingers and held on. She looked at him holding her fingers, and her face was the face Issei had seen in February, the one she had when she was recognizing something. Nobody said anything for a while. The afternoon went on. Xenovia wrote in her margins. Asia tended her flowers. The child held Kaneko's fingers and examined them with the full attention of someone conducting important research. It was, Issei thought, exactly the image of what they had built. Not perfect. Not without its complications and histories and the ongoing work of the people in it. But real and full in theirs, arrived at through the accumulation of honest choices made by people who had been willing to be exactly themselves in front of each other, and had found that exactly themselves was enough. The garden was warm. The afternoon was long. The child made a sound of great satisfaction regarding the fingers he was holding. Agreed, Issei told him. Xenovia looked up from her manual and looked at him with the small, specific look she had when she understood what he was thinking without being told, and then she looked at the garden, at all of it, and looked back at him, and what was in her face was the settled look, the one he had first seen on New Year's morning the year before, but larger now, expanded by everything that had come after. He held it. She held it back. The summer afternoon went on around them, warm and generous, and the world that they had made together was present in every direction. Act 4. Everything That Grows. Chapter 38. The child's name was Sora, and at 11 months he had developed a method of locomotion that was not quite walking and not quite crawling but was extremely fast and involved a confidence about the physics of his own body that was, Issei thought, one of the most purely entertaining things he had ever witnessed. He moved by placing both hands flat, pushing himself upright to a standing position, then releasing the surface he had used for support, and moving forward at a pace that exceeded what his balance could fully accommodate, so that each trip across a room was essentially a controlled fall in the direction of wherever he had decided to go. He had not yet grasped the concept of going slowly. He had decided on a destination, and the speed was simply what happened when he committed. He is going to be exactly like you, Xenovia said, watching him navigate the common room on a Saturday morning in January, the 2nd January of his life, his second winter. He picks a direction, and then he goes. He also falls down a lot, and then he gets up and goes again in the same direction. Yes. Exactly like you. Issei looked at her. She was sitting on the couch with her tea, watching Sora execute another magnificent controlled fall in the direction of the low table that held his current object of interest, a wooden block that Tannen had sent, which was made of something that was not ordinary wood and that had survived 11 months of focused investigation without any visible wear. Is that a criticism? He said. It is an observation, she said. I have never been made uncomfortable by people who pick a direction and go. It is the ones who drift that I do not trust. Sora reached the table, grabbed the wooden block with both hands, and looked at it with the focused attention he gave things he had already examined approximately 400 times. The examination was never perfunctory. Each time appeared to be the first time, or at least a new angle on the thing. He gets that from you, Issei said, the looking carefully. Yes. Xenovia considered this. I will accept that. Sora made a sound of great satisfaction regarding the block. It was not a word yet, but it had the structure of opinion, and opinion was clearly what he had. The morning went on around them, the household waking at its usual Saturday pace, Asia appearing first, and then Akino, and then Kiba, and eventually Rias, and each of them moved through the common room and interacted with Sora and went on with their morning, and the house had the quality it always had on Saturdays, of being slightly softer at the edges, the week's momentum not yet replaced by the weekends. Kaneko appeared last, because she slept later than the others when given the opportunity, and sat on the floor without ceremony, and Sora immediately abandoned the block and navigated toward her at his maximum speed, which ended, as it usually did, with Sora in motion toward Kaneko, in him arriving at her lap via the controlled fall method and looking up at her with an expression of complete success. Hello, she said. He said something that was not a word. I know, she said. He grabbed her hand. Yeah. Issei watched this and thought, this is what family looks like when it has had time to settle into itself. Not the idea of family, the performed version, but the actual version, the one that was made from accumulated Tuesday mornings and Saturday breakfasts, and the specific knowledge of how each person held their cup and what they said when they were tired and where they went when they needed to be alone. It was ordinary and it was irreplaceable, and he was inside it and grateful for it every day. Xenovia was looking at him. What, he said. You had the look. Which look? The one where you are taking stock of things and finding them satisfactory. I was. Good, she said. They are. Chapter 39. Sora's first word arrived in February, which was the month of his birth, and the timing felt right in a way that was probably coincidence but that Issei appreciated as a kind of symmetry. The word was not Mama, which would have been statistically likely, and it was not Papa, which would have been pleasing, and it was not any of the words that the books suggested were common first words. It was a word that he produced one morning in the kitchen when Kaneko set down a plate and turned to go, and he looked at her departing back and said, clearly and with intention, no. The kitchen stopped. Kaneko turned around slowly and looked at him. He was looking at her with the dark, steady eyes and his expression was entirely serious. No? She said. He held out his arms toward her. Kaneko went back to where he was and picked him up, and he settled against her with the air of someone who had identified a problem and resolved it efficiently. His first word was no, Asia said from the doorway, where she had witnessed the entire exchange with an expression of delighted wonder. His first word was no, directed at Kaneko to make her come back, Akino said from the counter, with her smile. This is an important distinction. Xenovia was at the table and she was looking at Sora with the careful, assessing look she had when she was observing something and forming an accurate description of it. He understood that she was leaving, she said. He understood that he did not want her to leave. He understood that he had a mechanism available to him to address this. And he used it correctly. That is a lot of understanding for someone who is 12 months old, Kiba said. He is our son, Xenovia said, in a tone that made it clear she found the surprise unwarranted. Issei was laughing, which he had been doing since the word had landed, and the laughing was the kind that came from something genuinely delightful, not performed, not polite, but the real thing. Okay, he said. I can work with no as a first word. It is an honest word. It means exactly what it means. It is the most honest word, Xenovia said. There are also only about 400 more of them, Akino said pleasantly, setting down her cup. And then he will have opinions about everything. He already has opinions about everything, Kaneko said, from where she was holding him. He has just been waiting for the vocabulary. Sora looked around at all of them with the expression he had when he was aware that he was the subject of attention, and found this appropriate. No, he said again, for clarity. The kitchen agreed with him, in the way that kitchens agreed with things when they were full of people who loved each other, by simply continuing to be warm around them all. Chapter 40. March brought a diplomatic situation that required careful navigation, and the careful navigation required Rias and Issei to travel to the Underworld for 4 days, which was the first time Issei had been away from Sora for more than a single evening. He was aware, preparing for the trip, that he was feeling something about this that he was not going to express out loud because it was not the kind of thing he was used to expressing out loud and also because it was somewhat irrational. Sora was 1 year old, and in excellent hands. The household was a capable and attentive collective of people who all adored him. Xenovia was there. Asia was there. There was no sensible reason for the specific low-grade apprehension that was sitting in the back of his chest as he packed. Xenovia found him packing and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "You are worried. I am fine. You are fine and you are also worried. Both things can be true." He stopped folding the shirt in his hands and looked at her. 4 days is a long time, he said. He will not notice 4 days in the way you think he will notice 4 days. He is one. His experience of time is not yours. I know that. Then what? He thought about it honestly, which she always asked for and which he had learned to provide. I have never been away from something I cared about this much, he said. I have left people before for missions and operations and I understood the risk and I accepted it. This is different. This is just me being away, not for a purpose that requires me specifically, just for something that could be handled differently if I were a different kind of person with a different kind of situation. But you are not a different kind of person, Xenovia said. You are this kind of person, which means you have obligations that go with who you are. Rias needs you there. The diplomatic situation benefits from your presence in ways that are real, not ceremonial. I know. Sora is here. I am here. The house is exactly as it always is. The 4 days will pass and you will come back and he will be exactly himself because that is who he is and 4 days will not have changed it. He looked at her. You are not telling me the worry is wrong, he said. No. I am telling you the worry is understandable and that you can hold it and go anyway, which is what adults do with understandable worries. He finished packing the shirt. Before he left, he spent 20 minutes sitting on the floor of the common room with Sora, who was conducting his usual morning investigation of everything within his reach and who acknowledged his father's presence by periodically handing him objects for assessment, and then taking them back. Issei assessed each one seriously. I will be back in 4 days, he told Sora. Sora handed him the wooden block. I know you do not have a concept of 4 days yet. But I am saying it anyway. Sora took the block back and examined it with great purpose. Be good, Issei said. Sora looked at him and said, No. Issei laughed, and the laughing made leaving easier, and he went. The 4 days passed. They were not without incident in the Underworld. The diplomatic situation had a layer beneath the presenting layer that required more careful handling than anticipated, and the work was real and the presence of a Longinus wielder mattered for the substance of the negotiations in ways that Rias had correctly anticipated. He came home on the 4th evening and Sora was in the common room with Kaneko when he walked in, and Sora looked at him, and his face did the thing it did when something arrived that it recognized and had been expecting, and he held out his arms. And Issei crossed the room and picked him up and held him, and the weight of him was exactly right and specific and Issei stood there for a moment just holding him. Xenovia was in the doorway. Well, she said. You were right, he said. He is exactly himself. Yes, she said. He went over to her and kissed her on the forehead, which was their greeting after absences, and she accepted this in the way she accepted things she had decided were good, fully and without reserve. Good trip? She said. Productive. I will tell you about it. After dinner. After dinner. The house was warm around them, and Sora had grabbed Issei's ear, which was a thing he had recently discovered was available, and was exploring with great interest. And the evening began in the way that evenings began when the whole of what mattered was in the same place. Chapter 41. The spring of Sora's second year brought his first real encounter with his own power. It was April, and he was 14 months old, and he was in the back garden with Xenovia while she ran through morning forms. This was a regular arrangement. He was contained by the garden fence and by Xenovia's awareness of his position, which was constant and peripheral, and he spent the time conducting his investigations of the garden's features with the systematic focus he brought to everything. The investigation on this particular morning was of a dandelion that had appeared near the base of the fence. He was crouched in front of it with his hands on his knees, examining it at close range, and Xenovia was midway through a sequence when she heard him make a sound that was not his usual sound. She stopped and turned. The dandelion was glowing. Not brightly, not dramatically, not in the way power usually announced itself when it was deliberately deployed. It was a soft, warm glow that was approximately the color of the sacred gear's light filtered through something gentler, and it was clearly emanating from Sora's hands, which were hovering over the flower now without touching it. Sora was looking at his hands. His expression was not frightened. It was the expression he had when he encountered new information and was processing it. The same expression he had given the wooden block 400 times. The same expression he had given his own reflection in the mirror the first time he found it. Interested. Calibrating. Xenovia crossed the garden and crouched beside him. The glow faded as she arrived, as though the attention shift had released it. Sora looked at her, and then at his hands and then at her again. You saw that, Xenovia said. No, he said, which was still his word for most things, though its use had become more varied and specific in the past few weeks. Yes, you did, she said. You are not afraid. He held out his hands and looked at them. The glow did not come back, but something in his face suggested he knew it was there. That is yours, Xenovia said. It is part of what you are. It will not hurt you. It will not hurt the flower. You will learn to understand it better over time. He looked at the dandelion. He looked at his hands. Good, he said, which was a word he had added recently, and used specifically, not generally. Yes, she said. Good. She stayed crouched beside him for a while longer while he returned to his examination of the dandelion with the addition of new information, and then she went back to her forms and he went back to his investigation, and the morning was ordinary and extraordinary in the way that all the genuinely important things were. That evening she told Issei, in the direct way she told him things, with full detail and without dramatization, and he listened, and when she was done he was quiet for a moment with a still look. He was not afraid, he said. Not at all. He said good. Yes. Issei sat with this. He thought about himself at 12, the power present and completely unrecognized, the years of not knowing what was there, the confusion that had lived in that not knowing. He thought about drag in the gear, watching host after host navigate the mystery of their own inheritance without anyone having ever told them clearly what it was. He is going to be all right, Issei said. He is going to be more than all right, Xenovia said. He is going to be himself. He has already decided that what he is good. Everything else is practice. Chapter 42. Summer came, and with it a visit from Michael's representative that turned into something more substantive than a courtesy call. The representative was a young seraph named Ramiel, who had been specifically selected for the visit because, as became clear in the first conversation, Michael had wanted to send someone who would be able to engage with the full complexity of the household rather than simply delivering a message and departing. Ramiel was formal in the way of heaven's representatives, structured and precise, and she assessed the household with a thoroughness that was not unfriendly but was definitely complete. She was, Issei gathered over the first hour, genuinely curious about how the people in this house had arrived at the arrangement they were in, a former church warrior, a former excommunicated nun who was now a devil's bishop, a seraph's representative visiting a devil's peerage without anything like the diplomatic formality that had once been required. Xenovia met her in the formal sitting room that the house had but that they rarely used, and the meeting had the character of two very specific people taking each other's measure. You served the church, Ramiel said. Yes. And then you became a devil. Yes. Do you miss it? The certainty. Xenovia considered this. I miss the clarity that certainty provided, she said. I do not miss the certainty itself, because it turned out not to be founded on true information, and a certainty without foundation is not actually a certainty. It is a story you have been told so consistently that you have stopped checking it. Ramiel looked at her for a moment. Michael said you would be direct, she said. Michael has never met me, Xenovia said. No. But he is Michael. He reads what is true about people through their history. She paused. He wanted me to bring you something. Not a message. A recognition. Of what? That what you have built here, the life you have built, is not a departure from anything that matters. It is a continuation of it. The work of making things honest and good and specific is the same work regardless of which side of the arrangement you are on. He wanted you to know that he sees that. Xenovia was quiet for a moment. This was the thing she had not expected, that the acknowledgement she had not known she was waiting for would arrive from this particular direction, through this particular person, in this particular sitting room where she had rarely sat. Tell him thank you, she said. I will. And tell him Sora said good when he first met his own power. I think he will find that interesting. Ramiel's formal expression shifted very slightly towards something warmer. He will find that very interesting. She stayed for dinner, which she had not planned to do, and the dinner was ordinary in the best sense, food and conversation and Sora at the end of the table in the high chair Issei's father had made, conducting his usual investigation of whatever was within his reach, and Ramiel watched the household being itself and said nothing about it, but the quality of her attention said everything. When she left she paused in the doorway and looked at Xenovia. The blade and the dragon, she said. It is an unusual combination. Most combinations that work are, Xenovia said. Ramiel smiled, fully, for the first and only time. Yes, she said. I suppose they are. Chapter 43. There was a crisis in August. The word crisis was one that Issei had used often enough in his life that it had become somewhat categorized, organized into types and levels by the experience of having been through a number of them. And the one that arrived in the second week of August was the type that did not announce itself with an obvious signature but rather revealed itself gradually over the course of a day as the available information assembled into a shape that required immediate attention. A faction of former Chaos Brigade members who had not been fully accounted for in the resolution of the brigade's main operations had been operating quietly in the space between the three factions, building towards something for 18 months. What they had been building toward was not a new conflict in the large sense, they did not have the numbers for that, but something more specific and more troubling, a targeted disruption of the individual people who had been most instrumental in the current peace arrangement. The Gremory peerage was on the list. Rias received the intelligence through Surzex and called an immediate meeting in the club room, and the peerage assembled with the particular quality they had when something real was in front of them, the social layers absent, and only the functional ones present. The threat is specific, Rias said, with the map on the table and the intelligence summary in front of her. They are not trying to fight us. They are trying to destabilize us. The targets are personal, not strategic. Personal means Sora, Issei said. The word was flat and clear and without heat, which was more focused than heat would have been, among others. Yes, Xenovia had been still since the word personal had appeared. It was the stillness she had before something that required the fullest version of what she was, and everyone in the room recognized it, and gave it the space it needed. Who is their point of operational contact in Co? She said. We have a probable location. Eastern District, same general area as the Valthros operation. The same area or the same building, Kiba said. The same block. Different building. They are using the geography because they know it, Xenovia said. They were watching the Valthros operation and they learned the terrain from it. That is Azazel's assessment as well, Rias said. Then they are also watching us. They know our approach patterns from the Valthros operation. She looked at the map. We do not use the same approach. Agreed. Different entry vectors, different timing. The planning took longer than the Valthros operation had, because the situation was more complex and because there was a dimension present that had not been present before. The knowledge that the target was not simply the peerage in a professional sense but the peerage in its private one, the child in the house, the life they had built. Issei was aware of this dimension, and he was also aware that the awareness of it needed to be used, and not allowed to become something that operated on him instead. The distinction was important. Fear for someone you loved was a resource if you kept it properly placed, if it sharpened your attention and your commitment without narrowing your judgment. It became a liability only when it ran ahead of you instead of alongside you. He had learned this from Xenovia, who was the most disciplined person he knew about the management of things that mattered without allowing them to manage her. The operation ran the following night. The faction had learned their approach patterns from the Valthros operation, as Xenovia had assessed, and the counter to that was to present no recognizable pattern at all, to come from vectors that the prior operation had not used, and at a timing that had no relationship to any prior action. It worked. They were inside the building's perimeter before the faction's external security understood they were in the area, and once they were inside the timeline was compressed enough that the faction's response capability was never fully organized. Issei ran the center, Xenovia ran the left, Kiba was overhead, and the combination they had been building since before they were married operated with a precision that was not practiced so much as natural at this point. The natural quality of two people who knew each other entirely and had spent 2 years learning exactly how to fill each other's spaces. The faction's leadership was contained. The threat was removed. Nobody from the peerage was seriously injured. They came home before dawn and the house was dark and quiet, and Sora was asleep in his room with the small night light that Asia had installed that was shaped like a star, and that cast a soft blue glow across the ceiling. Issei stood in the doorway of Sora's room for a moment, and looked at him sleeping with the specific unconscious intensity that toddlers brought to sleep, fully committed to it, all of himself engaged. Xenovia stood beside him. They did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying that was not already fully present in the moment, and the fact of them standing together in the doorway looking at their sleeping child in the quiet house at the end of a night that had been about protecting this specific thing. After a moment Xenovia put her hand on his arm, just her hand resting on his arm, and he put his hand over hers, and they stood there for another moment, and then they went to bed, and the morning was coming, and everything they had built was exactly where they had left it. Chapter 44. September was the month Xenovia told him she was pregnant again. This time she told him in the evening, after Sora was asleep, sitting in the kitchen with the particular kitchen quiet that came after the house had put itself to bed and only the two of them were still up. Again, Issei said. Again, she confirmed. He looked at her for a moment, and something in his face was the same as the first time, that quality she had identified as vast, and then something else arrived alongside it. Something that was easier and more immediate because the first time had already happened and he knew what was on the other side of this. How do you feel? He said. I feel, she said, considering, as though I know what I am doing now. Which is different. Confident? Not confident. More like oriented. The first time I was moving through unfamiliar terrain and managing the unfamiliarity alongside everything else. This time the terrain is known. It is still difficult. But it is navigable in a way I understand. He nodded. Sora is going to have a sibling, he said. Yes. He is going to have opinions about this. A corner of her mouth moved. He has opinions about everything. True. The kitchen was quiet around them. Outside the window September was being September, the air beginning its shift from summer's directness to autumn's considered quality. And the garden was in the last of its summer arrangement before it started putting itself away for the year. I want a daughter, Xenovia said, which was not something she had said before, and she said it in the same tone she said things that were true and direct, without hedging. I think about it either way, Issei said. I know you do. I am telling you what I want. Not instead of what you think, alongside it. Okay. Is that allowed? Wanting things is absolutely allowed, he said. Wanting things out loud is one of the things I love most about you. She looked at him. I want a daughter, she said again, this time with something underneath it that was warmer, the underneath thing she let out when she had decided the moment was right for it. I hope you get what you want, he said. I usually do, she said, which was not arrogance but observation. He laughed, the real one, and she permitted herself the small smile, and the kitchen held them both in its September quiet, and the next chapter of what they were building was already in motion. Chapter 45. Sora understood that something was changing before he had language to describe what he understood. He was 18 months old when the second pregnancy became part of the household's life, and at 18 months his language was expanding rapidly, one of those developmental accelerations that the books had mentioned and that Asia had flagged as particularly likely given his heritage. He was adding words in clusters now, not one at a time, groupings that seemed to arrive overnight and that were suddenly simply present in his vocabulary. He understood: warm, good, no, yes, here, there, come, more, done, sleep, up again, Kona, Kaneko, compressed by his current phonological capabilities, Aisha, Asia, Mama, Papa, block, bird, star, dark, light, and approximately 30 others. He did not yet have a word for the thing he was sensing, which was the shift in the house's quality, the way the adults were doing things that had a new kind of attention in them, the way his mother moved differently, and the way his father watched her move differently. He navigated this the way he navigated everything, with systematic attention. He spent a week being more present in rooms where Xenovia was, which was an escalation from his usual presence that she noted without commenting on. He brought her things from his investigation pile, the wooden block and a round smooth stone from the garden that he had carried inside and that had become part of his collection, and a feather that he had found near the fence that he considered significant. She accepted each of these seriously and set them in front of her while he watched, and then handed them back. Something is different, she told him, one morning in October when he had brought her the stone again and was looking at her with the steady, processing eyes. Inside me, right now, something is growing. A person. Like you were growing before you were here. He looked at her stomach. Yes, she said. There. He put his hand flat against her stomach in the careful way he touched things he was treating as important. Not pressing, just resting. The look on his face was the look he had had with the dandelion in April, the recognizing look, the one that meant he was processing new information and was not afraid of it but was giving it the full attention it deserved. Good, he said. She put her hand over his, just for a moment. Yes, she said. Very good. He went back to his investigation of the stone. The stone remained interesting regardless of everything else. Chapter 46. The second pregnancy moved with a different rhythm than the first. Not easier, exactly, but more navigable, as Xenovia had said. She knew the tiredness now and made room for it rather than being surprised by it. She adjusted her training earlier and with less internal resistance, the modifications familiar in form even if still requiring adjustment in practice. She was less interior than the first time, more continuously present in the daily life of the household, because the first time there had been so much unknown territory to process that the processing had taken place on a separate interior level. Now the territory was known and the processing could happen in parallel with everything else. She talked about it more, which Issei noticed and did not comment on because the noticing was sufficient. She told him things as they occurred to her, not organized thoughts but live ones, the kind that arrived in the middle of other things and were produced without editorial filtering. I wonder if she will be like Sora or different, she said one evening, out of the particular quality of quiet they sat in together, the kind that had room in it for things like this. Different probably, he said. Sora is completely himself. She will be completely herself. Those are going to be different selves. Do you think Sora will be protective of her? I think Sora will try to explain to her how everything works. Xenovia considered this. That is protective in his specific way. His specific way is already very specific. He gets that from you. You said the direction thing was from me? Now the specificity. You are a specific person who goes in a direction, she said. These are the same quality in different expressions. He thought about this. What does she get from you? The honesty, she said immediately. And the ability to be still in difficult situations. And the thing about knowing what she is. The knowing what you are. I had to find that. It took years and several significant disruptions to the things I thought I knew. I would like for her to simply have it, from the beginning, as a given. We will give it to her, he said. Yes, she said. We will. November arrived and the household arranged itself around the second pregnancy with the ease of something it had done before, the patterns already established, the adjustments already understood, and Sora watched all of it with his steady dark eyes and his hands still occasionally pressed flat against his mother's stomach in the careful way that meant he was checking on what he already knew was there. Once Xenovia felt a flutter from the other side of where his hand rested, the first flutter of this new small person making itself known. And Sora's eyes went very wide for a moment. Yes, Xenovia said. Good, he said. And then, with the growing vocabulary, again? Probably not right now. But again eventually. He looked at his hand on her stomach, thoroughly satisfied with this information, and went to find Kaneko to tell her, which was the thing he did when he had information that he had decided was important. Chapter 47. December came and the household put up the tree, which was now a 3-year tradition with its own weight of repetition, and this time Sora participated. He participated in the way that toddlers participated in things, with enormous enthusiasm, variable aim, and complete commitment to the process regardless of outcome. He was deeply interested in the tree and deeply interested in everything that came near the tree and had opinions, expressed at volume, about the placement of each item Asia and Aquino added to its branches. No, he said, of the small silver ornament Aquino placed on a lower branch. It looks nice there, Aquino said. No. Where should it go? He pointed, with great conviction, at the top of the tree, which was 6 feet above his head. That seems ambitious, Aquino said. Up, he said. Issei put the ornament higher, not at the top but significantly higher, and Sora looked at this placement with the critical eye of someone who had a clear picture in their mind and was assessing correspondence. Again, he said. Issei moved it up another branch. Sora looked at it. Good, he said, and moved on to the next ornament. He is going to redecorate the entire tree, Rias said, from the couch where she was watching with her tea. He has a vision, Issei said. He has your vision, Xenovia said from the armchair where she was watching with her tea. The thing about picking a direction. The thing about picking a direction. The tree was, eventually, decorated according to Sora's specifications, which placed most things higher than they would naturally have gone and which had a specific internal logic that was not exactly standard tree decorating logic but that had a consistency to it once you understood it. Sora stood back and looked at the completed tree with the expression of a person who has seen the thing through to completion according to their own vision. Good, he said. The household agreed, Not because it was the most conventional tree they had ever seen, but because it was exactly the tree that he had made it, and that made it exactly right. Irina arrived on the 23rd and looked at the tree and said, "Did a small person do this?" "Yes," Xenovia said. "I love it," Irina said. Sora looked at Irina and said, "Good." Irina looked at him for a moment, and then at Xenovia with an expression that contained multitudes. "He is going to be terrifying when he is 15. He is already somewhat terrifying and he is 1.5, Xenovia said. "He gets that from you," Issei said. "No," Sora said. The kitchen erupted. Chapter 48. The year turned again, the 3rd year of their marriage, and the house went into January with its particular January quality, the quiet after the full end-of-year period, the return of ordinary rhythms. Issei sat with Drake one night in January, not in crisis, not because anything required it, simply because he had wanted to and because the relationship had become one that had its own value outside of the specific moments when the power was needed. "Sora will want to meet you properly one day," he said, "in the space between sleep and waking." "I know," Drake said. "I have been aware of him since before he arrived. He is aware of me as well." "He is?" "Not consciously. But awareness is not only conscious. He knows something is here. He has been orienting toward it the way plants orient toward light, not because they have decided to but because the thing is there, and they are built to respond to it." "Is that going to be all right? When he is old enough to come in fully?" "Yes," Drake said, with the certainty of very old things. "Better than all right. He already knows what he is. A child who knows what they are meets me as information, not as disruption. The ones who do not know meet me as a revelation that reorganizes everything they thought was true, and that is a harder meeting." "You have been thinking about this." "I have had time." Issei was quiet for a moment. "There is another one coming," he said. "I know. She has a different quality." "Different how?" "Sora went outward from the beginning. She goes inward first. Not shyly, she is not shy, I can sense that already. But she will understand the inside of things before she moves outward. She will know the root of what she is before she shows it." Issei thought about this. He thought about Xenovia, who had always known the inside of things before she showed them, who had known her own feelings for months before she spoke them aloud and had spoken them only when she was fully certain. "She gets that from Xenovia," he said. "Yes," Drake said. "She does. Is it strange for you?" Issei said. "Watching this. Watching me become this." Drake was quiet for a long moment in the deep way he was quiet when the answer required depth. "Strange is not the word," he said finally. "I have been many things over many centuries and I have seen many hosts live many lives. Most of those lives were worth living. Some were not. Yours," he paused again, "yours is a life that is making something. Most lives consume. Yours is making. I find that I am glad to have been part of it. That is not strange. That is correct." Issei sat with this in the between space for a while. "Thank you, partner," he said. "Go to sleep," Drake said, with the warmth that was entirely his own. "Tomorrow is a real day and real days require rest." Issei came back to waking and Xenovia was asleep beside him and the house was quiet and dark and outside the January night was clear. And he lay there for a long time just being inside what he had, which was full and specific and real, and eventually he slept. Chapter 49. The daughter arrived in April. The birth was different from Sora's in the specific way that Drake had described, not in difficulty, or in the physical facts of it but in quality. Where Sora had announced himself, the daughter arrived with a completeness that was its own kind of announcement. A presence that was immediate and total and that filled the room in the way that certain people filled rooms, not loudly, not with motion or sound, but with something that made the air of the room feel different. Asia was there, as she had been for Sora, and her face when she held the child was the face it had been before, of someone doing the thing they were most fully equipped to do. She placed the child in Xenovia's arms and the child was quiet, not the quiet of a problem but of something complete. Something that had arrived and recognized that it had arrived. She opened her eyes. They were the same dark as Sora's but different, not the outward dark, the seeking dark, but a dark that went in, that had depth rather than direction. Xenovia looked at her, and something happened in her face that was different from what had happened with Sora. With Sora it had been vast, enormous in both directions. This was different. This was like something completing a circuit that had been running since before she could name it. Issei was beside her, and he was looking at his daughter, and he was not doing anything except looking, and his face was the face it had been when the honest things arrived, and he simply let them be honest. The daughter looked back. She looked at her mother and then at her father with the eyes that went inward, and whatever she found in looking at each of them she kept, the way people who went inward first kept what they found before they showed it. She is here, Xenovia said, the same words she had said for Sora. She is here, Issei said. She is exactly herself, Xenovia said, which was a new addition. Already, Issei agreed. Outside the April morning was doing what April mornings did, the light coming through the window with the particular quality of spring light that had warmth in it without the fullness of summer, the kind of light that was about beginning rather than about being already underway. The name they had chosen for her was specific and clear and went inward the same way she did, a name that was complete in itself rather than pointing outward, and when Xenovia said it aloud for the first time in the room it settled in the air the way the right name settled, like something finding the place it had always been meant to occupy. Asia in the corner was very quiet, which was her way of holding things that were too full for words. The daughter, for her part, held everything she was finding with the interior patience that was already completely hers, and looked at her parents with the eyes that went deep, and was, by every evidence available, exactly what she had decided to be before anyone could have told her anything about it. Chapter 50. Sora met his sister on the morning after she arrived. He had been informed. Xenovia had been clear with him throughout the pregnancy about what was coming, and what it would mean, in the direct language she used for everything, adjusted for his current vocabulary which had expanded considerably and was now capable of managing more complex information than no and good and again. He knew, sister, baby, coming, little, careful. He was brought into the room by Issei, who was holding his hand, and he walked up to the bed where Xenovia was sitting with the baby in her arms with the deliberate pace he used when he was approaching something important, and was being careful about it. He stopped at the edge of the bed. The baby looked at him. He looked at the baby. The looking lasted for several seconds, which was a long time for Sora, who was in general a person of action rather than extended contemplation, and during the looking something passed between them that was not a word and not a sound but that was clearly something, a mutual recognition of a category of relationship that was entirely new to both of them. Baby, Sora said for confirmation. Yes, Xenovia said. Your sister. He considered this. Good, he said. Yes. He reached out one hand slowly, with the careful quality he had when handling things he had identified as important, and touched the side of the baby's face with one finger, the lightest possible touch. The baby's eyes, which had been looking at him, did not move. Sora left his finger there for a moment, and then withdrew it, and stepped back one step and looked at Issei. Good, he said again, with great conviction, which was the summary of his full assessment. Issei looked at him, and then at Xenovia and then at the daughter in her arms who was still looking at the place where her brother had been with the interior attention she gave everything. Yeah, Issei said. Very good. The household met her over the course of that day, each person in their turn, and each meeting was specific to the person doing the meeting. Kaneko, who had always had a particular relationship with Sora, stood at the bedside and looked at the daughter with a look that was different, more waiting, as though she was giving the daughter space to reveal herself rather than meeting her with anything assumed. The daughter looked back at Kaneko with the inward eyes, and after a moment Kaneko sat down in the chair beside the bed and was simply present, which was the thing the daughter seemed to want, and they spent 20 minutes in a mutual quiet that was its own kind of meeting. Rias held her the way she had held Sora, with the same care, and looked at her the same way, and found something different looking back, something that met her gaze without the outward engagement Sora always brought but with a depth that was its own engagement. She is watching, Rias said quietly. She is always watching, Xenovia said. I recognize that, Rias said, and something in her expression was personal and warm and slightly amused. Aquino came last and held her, and said, She already knows what she thinks about everyone. She has been here less than a day, Issei said. Yes, Aquino said, without adjusting her position. She already knows. The baby made a small sound that was not language and was also not nothing. Agreed, Aquino said. Chapter 51. Summer came, the daughter's first summer, and the house in that summer had a quality that Issei would spend time later trying to describe to himself, and would always arrive at the same word, full. Not full in the sense of crowded or busy, though there was more of both than there had been before. Full in the sense of complete, of having the shape that had always been its correct shape and now occupying it. Sora at 20 months was a person with a comprehensive worldview and strong opinions about most things in it. He had by now decided that the back garden was his domain of investigation and had organized it, in his mind, into specific zones of interest with which he maintained an ongoing research relationship. He had also decided that his sister was one of the most interesting things in the house, which surprised nobody, and that his relationship with her was one in which he was the senior and experienced party, and that it was therefore his responsibility to explain things to her. He explained things to her constantly. She could not yet respond with words, but she listened with the attentiveness she brought to everything, and her listening was the kind of listening that made people feel genuinely heard, which Sora found very satisfying and which kept him coming back. "That is the block," he told her one afternoon, holding the wooden block in front of her face with the earnest clarity of a lecturer. "Tannen made it. Tannen is very big. He is a dragon. Papa has a dragon too. His is inside. The block is solid." The daughter looked at the block with her inward eyes. "You can touch it when you are bigger," Sora said. "Right now I will hold it." She reached out a hand toward it anyway. Sora looked at her hand and then at her face and recalculated. "Okay," he said, and held the block closer. She touched it. Whatever she found in the touching she kept, in the way she kept things, but her hand stayed on the block for a long moment, and Sora watched her with the attentive, assessing look that was already so familiar on a face that was still very young. "Good?" he said. She looked at him. "Good," he confirmed, for both of them. Xenovia watched this from the couch with the particular quality she had when she was observing something important and forming an accurate account of it, and what she was forming an accurate account of was, "My son is 20 months old, and he is already a good older brother." He made an assumption, she corrected it without language, and he adjusted without resistance. "He is going to be good at people. The specific kind of good, the kind that responds to what is actually in front of them." She made a note of this in the internal ledger she kept of things she wanted to tell Issei, who was not in the room but who she would find in the kitchen in approximately 40 minutes, and she would tell him and he would listen with the full attention he gave things she told him, and something in his face would do the thing it did when he was receiving something good. She looked forward to that. Outside the summer was being exactly what summer was, warm and full and going on, and the house was full in the way it was now full, with the right people in the right arrangement, everything made rather than found, built from honest choices and accumulated days and the specific work of two people who had decided to mean what they did. The daughter grabbed the block. "Okay," Sora said. "You can have it. I will get the stone." He went for the stone. The daughter held the block and the summer went on, and Xenovia added the moment to the ledger, and the house was, in every direction and without reservation, good. End of Act 4.